A cold morning was not unusual in this highland region. However, the strange thing was the young woman leaving the old mansion, walking down the slope towards the lake, dressed only in a thin jacket. Was she mentally unstable? Not necessarily, because after reaching the lakeshore, she waved to a horse-drawn carriage and pointed towards the outskirts, specifically the cemetery. The first carriage driver would rather wait for another passenger than go to the cemetery this early. Only the second driver, an old man, agreed to take her. Finally, the carriage stopped in front of the largest cemetery gate in the city of Dalat. The coachman, now curious, asked, "You're visiting a grave quite early. Do you need a ride back later?" "I'll wait." She simply smiled softly and waved her hand in refusal without saying a word. She headed straight into the cemetery unnoticed, as the caretaker had not yet woken up at that hour. She walked deeper into the vast cemetery that covered almost an entire side of the sloping hill. Eventually, she stopped in front of an imposing tomb made of granite, stood still, and bowed her head. At that moment, she shivered. Perhaps now the cold had finally seeped in. And in such a chilly morning, if one doesn't warm up quickly after a shiver, illness is almost certain. But that would not happen, because just then, she gently reached towards the top of the tombstone, where a coat had already been hung, as if waiting for her, and she put it on quite naturally. Once she was warm enough, she slowly sat down in a spot where someone had already placed a fresh bouquet of yellow gladiolus. It was then that the tombstone revealed the inscription, "Grave of Dalan." She did not pray, nor did she burn incense as people typically do when visiting a grave. Instead, she sat in silence for a long time. Finally, a sob escaped her. The cold, gloomy morning enveloped the desolate cemetery. At that moment, a black car suddenly pulled up at the gate. A young man stepped out, glanced around, and muttered, "Where could she have gone?" The coachman, still parked nearby and smoking a cigarette, was about to ask when the young man spoke first. "Have you seen a young woman come in here?" The coachman pointed and replied, "She went in about 5 minutes ago." The young man quickly left his car and was about to enter the cemetery when he paused and said, "If you're still here, could you let her know that Fook is here looking for her if she comes out?" "Thank you." Fook hurriedly ran through row after row of graves, not knowing exactly where the woman had gone, but somehow, he stopped at the right tomb, Dalan's grave. All that remained at the headstone was the bouquet of gladiolus, and there was no sign of her. He stood silently before the grave for a long time. Then, he quietly wandered around nearly the entire cemetery. Still, there was no trace of her. Disappointed, he sighed. "I couldn't find her at the house, and now she's not here. So where could she have gone?" Almost an hour later, Fook finally came back to the entrance. The coachman was still parked there, and his curiosity got the better of him. "Did you find her?" Fook shook his head, and the coachman quickly added, "This cemetery only has one exit here, and on the other side is a steep hill, no way to climb that. She's still in there, I'm sure of it. I waited because, well, she seemed so sad and lonely." Fook climbed into the carriage and reminded the coachman, "If she comes out later, please tell her that Fook was looking for her. It's urgent. Tell her that I spoke with her on the phone last night. She'll remember." In truth, Fook had only just met the girl over a phone call he made to the old mansion to inquire about renting a room for his stay in Dalat. He had called to speak with the homeowner, but the girl picked up instead. When Fook asked if the house had any rooms available, she mentioned that she, too, was a guest, but if he wanted to rent the place, he could come tomorrow since she was checking out in the morning. Fook had hurriedly asked where she would be going after she left, and her abrupt response was, "To the other world." She hung up the phone immediately after saying that. This morning, when Fook arrived at the mansion, the landlady informed him that the girl had just checked out, and it seemed she wasn't coming back. Remembering the girl's unsettling words, Fook had asked the landlady which way she had gone, and she pointed toward the lake. When Fook questioned the first coachman, who had refused to take her, he told Fook that she had headed toward the cemetery. Feeling an ominous sense of foreboding, Fook had rushed to the cemetery. With no other options, Fook drove back to the old mansion. As soon as he arrived, the landlady approached him and said, "I just got a phone call. Recognized the voice right away. It was Miss Hong Han. But as soon as I answered, the other end hung up. Strange, isn't it? The girl's name is Hong Han?" "Yes. A kind and lovely girl, but so pitiful. I don't understand why she's so lonely. In all the months she stayed here, I've never seen any friends come visit. Someone as beautiful as her, you'd think. Maybe she's too picky?" Fook suggested. The landlady immediately defended her. "No, not at all. She speaks gently and is very polite. I think she's carrying some heavy burden in her heart." Fook decided to change the subject and asked about the room. "Are you sure she's left for good? If so, I'd like to rent the room." After a moment of hesitation, the landlady agreed. "Honestly, I was hoping she'd go somewhere and come back to stay again. But well, we'll see later. For now, if you're her friend, it's fine for you to rent the room." Fook thought about clarifying that he wasn't really her friend, but he let it slide and asked, "Can I move in right away?" "Yes, that's fine." "How long do you plan on staying?" "Well, if things go smoothly, maybe 2 months. If it takes longer, I might stay a little longer. Is that all right?" "Sure. I live here alone, so having someone stay would be nice. To be honest, I feel comfortable letting you stay since you're a friend of Miss Hong Han. I usually don't rent to young men." Fook guessed that she was wary of tenants bringing women back to the house, so he quickly reassured her. "Don't worry, I'm like Hong Han. I'll be living alone and won't have any friends over, especially not women." The landlady immediately explained, "I'm not banning female guests. Once you rent the room, it's your right. I just worry about people who aren't respectful. But with you, I feel at ease. Go ahead and move in. Whatever arrangement Miss Han had, it'll be the same for you." Fook gestured to his car. "I have this car for getting around. Is it okay if I park it somewhere close?" The landlady joked. "Well, with your car, if I ever need to rush to the hospital or something urgent, I suppose it'll come in handy." Amused by her lightheartedness, Fook asked more about Hong Han. "So, what did Miss Han do while she stayed here?" "She didn't tell you?" the landlady asked, surprised. "No, she didn't. She said she was looking for information about her family's past." Fook was intrigued. "Did she ever find it?" "I don't know either. She never mentioned anything." Suddenly, Fook remembered the incident at the cemetery and exclaimed, "The grave in the cemetery." The landlady didn't understand and asked, "Whose grave are you talking about? Do you know if Hong Han has any relatives buried in the city's cemetery?" The landlady shook her head. "I haven't heard anything about that." "But why? Did you see her going into the cemetery earlier?" Fook pondered for a moment, and then shook his head. "No, I didn't see her, but perhaps." Fook arrived with only a suitcase of clothes, so it didn't take long for him to settle into the room. When he entered, he could still smell the lingering fragrance typical of a girl's bedroom. After looking around, he found no trace of the previous occupant, except when he opened the wardrobe and discovered a set of pink silk loungewear. It was clearly something she had left behind. Fook informed the landlady, but she told him, "Just leave it in the wardrobe for now. Maybe she'll come back to collect it someday." Although he complied, Fook couldn't stop thinking about the clothes. He kept taking them out to look at them, then putting them back. But every time he looked at them hanging in the wardrobe, he imagined her wandering in the cemetery, and suddenly, he felt uneasy. Fook didn't even understand why he was concerned or why he was so preoccupied with a girl he didn't know at all. It was past 11 that night, and Fook still couldn't sleep. He walked over to the window and looked outside. There was a flower garden behind the house. The night was cold and foggy, and a chill swept in, making him shiver. Just as he was about to close the window, a figure swiftly passed by, not far from where he stood. Who would be outside in such cold weather at this time of night? Fook wondered to himself, but before he could find an answer, he suddenly felt dizzy, his vision blurred as if he had caught a cold. He had to lean against the window to keep from collapsing. After a long while, he finally overcame the sudden dizziness. He quickly closed the window and returned to bed. But when he looked at the open wardrobe where the silk clothes had been hanging earlier, they were gone. At the same time, a faint fragrance lingered in the air throughout the room. Could it be? Fook stood in place for a moment, then threw open both wardrobe doors, feeling a bit anxious. He wondered, who could have entered this room? He feared that someone might have snuck into the room while he was dizzy, but when he checked the door, the inside latch was still secured. Only the window. Could it be? Fook thought of the figure he had seen earlier. However, the window was on the first floor of the house, quite far from the ground below, so it seemed impossible. It took more than an hour before Fook finally drifted off to sleep. But just as he was dozing off, he felt something poke sharply into his side, startling him awake. When he reached out to touch the object, he was shocked to find the silk clothes lying right next to him. Turning on the light to inspect, he confirmed that it was indeed the same clothes from earlier. Still unsure if he could trust his own eyes, he picked them up for a closer look and discovered a note attached, which fell to the floor. He read the words, "Why are you longing for what isn't yours?" He didn't know who the message was meant for, but Fook had a strong feeling it was directed at him. He shuddered, realizing that someone had entered his room while he slept and returned the clothes. This was certain. He opened the door and called for the landlady. Though she was annoyed at being awakened, she was startled when she heard what Fook had to say. "Is that really what happened?" she assured Fook. "Nothing like this has ever happened in this house before. And the house is secured, so there's no way anyone could have gotten inside. Besides, there are 2 dogs outside in the garden. Even the smallest noise would make them bark loudly. But I didn't hear anything earlier." Not wanting to argue, Fook quietly closed the door. But just then, the landlady knocked and said, "Perhaps it's best if you let me hold on to those clothes for now." Fook didn't really want to, but he couldn't refuse, so he handed the clothes to her. He thought to himself that maybe this was for the best. After that, Fook slept soundly. However, just before dawn, he heard the landlady running over and calling out, "How strange, Mr. Fook, the clothes, how could they?" Looking at her expression, Fook suddenly asked, "Have the clothes gone missing again?" The landlady, frightened, responded, "They're gone. I locked the door carefully." Mrs. Anhong really needed Fook's presence in the house after that incident. She couldn't sleep for several days until Fook informed her of an even more shocking news. "That outfit is currently in my suitcase." When moving in, Fook had taken all the clothes out of his suitcase to hang in the wardrobe, leaving the suitcase under the bed. After the incident with the girl's clothes going missing, he searched the room but never thought it would be inside the suitcase. It was only this morning, when he suddenly remembered some miscellaneous items he had left in there, that he pulled the suitcase out and was stunned to find the silk outfit neatly placed inside. He immediately called Mrs. Anhong, who spoke in a trembling voice. "You should get rid of that outfit. I can't sleep because of it, and now with this happening, I think I'm going to die." Fook just mumbled, "Okay, I'll think about it." Though he said that, Fook secretly placed the outfit back in the suitcase and told himself, "Let's see." He left very early to return to the cemetery. After several days of contemplation, Fook finally decided he had to go back one more time. He wandered almost everywhere and eventually found the grave of Dao Lan, marked by an easily recognizable feature. Right in front of the grave was a fresh bouquet of calla lilies, just like the day before. This bouquet had definitely been placed there early this morning or possibly the night before, not the old bouquet he had seen previously. Fook read the inscription on the gravestone carefully and murmured, "What is her relationship with the person buried here?" Fook was wondering about Hong Han, the girl who had been driving him and Mrs. Anhong crazy. He didn't think Hong Han was the one causing the recent troubles. It could be the person lying under this grave. Looking closely at the inscription, he noticed the birth and death dates, and Fook exclaimed, "Died very young." If calculated, this girl died at only 18 years old. He couldn't help but sigh. Dying young like that, no wonder. Fook planned to ask Mrs. An Hong when he got back, as she might know something about the girl named Da Lan. For now, having nothing else to do, he wandered around the cemetery a bit longer before deciding to leave. However, he didn't know why he ended up passing by the old lot again, returning to Da Lan's grave. This time, he was confused because the bouquet at the head of the grave was not the yellow calla lilies from before, but rather a vibrant yellow rose bouquet. Thinking someone must have just visited the grave, Fook looked around, but seeing no one, he shouted, "Who is here? Who just visited Da Lan's grave?" No one answered, and Fook suddenly thought of the girl, exclaiming, "Hong Han!" As soon as he spoke, he heard a soft cry nearby. The cry of a girl. Fook looked up and spotted a figure quickly darting behind the graves on the other side. Without thinking, Fook ran after her, calling out loudly, "Hong Han! Miss Han!" The figure ran very fast, and even though he tried to speed up, by the time he reached the gate, she had vanished. As he stood there bewildered, he suddenly heard the roar of a car engine not far away. Starting his own car, Fook rushed after it, thinking that if he could just catch this car, all his questions would be answered. However, the car was heading out towards the suburbs and maintained a very fast speed, even as it passed through the densely populated area of Traham. It took a lot of effort for Fook to keep up, and at a bend in the road, he pushed himself to overtake the other vehicle. With a professional maneuver, he managed to get ahead of the car and pretended to have a problem, stopping his vehicle and forcing the other car to stop as well. Just waiting for that moment, Fook quickly got out of his car and quickly scanned the inside of that vehicle, hoping to see the girl from earlier. But Fook was mistaken. There was no one in the car except for an older driver. Feeling embarrassed, Fook tried to explain. "Excuse me, I'm just having brake trouble, I wanted to." The driver smiled politely at Fook and slowly maneuvered his car around and drove straight ahead. It took Fook more than 10 seconds to calm down and follow after him. However, oddly, his engine was running, but when he shifted gears to move forward, the car wouldn't budge. The drivers behind him honked loudly in protest of his car blocking the way, but Fook couldn't get his vehicle to move. Frustrated and irritated, a driver behind jumped out and approached Fook's car, shouting, "What's wrong with your car?" Fook had to respond, "My car has brake trouble." The impatient guy pushed hard on the back of Fook's car, which lurched forward and almost hit a few people in front. Fook had a scare and was further yelled at by other drivers. "Can't drive and still think you can?" Fook gritted his teeth to follow the other car, still suspicious that he might have missed something inside. But after more than 5 minutes, he still couldn't spot the car ahead. Meanwhile, at a turn, that vehicle stopped in front of a house filled with flowers, and the driver got out. As he removed his hat, long hair cascaded down to his waist. It was a girl. As for Fook, after a fruitless search, he had to drive back to his lodging. He immediately looked for Mrs. An Hong and asked, "Has she ever mentioned anyone named Da Lan?" Mrs. An Hong shook her head. "Never heard of her." Fook recounted everything he had just encountered and concluded, "The girl named Hong Han has some connection to a deceased person named Da Lan, and it seems that this Da Lan has caused the strange occurrences that we have experienced these past few days." Having been scared for a few days, hearing Fook's account made Mrs. An Hong even more frightened. She asked softly, "What should we do now, Fook?" Fook could only shake his head. Suddenly, she suggested, "Maybe today I should prepare a meal to honor her?" "Honor who?" "The girl you just mentioned." "Da Lan." "Yes, her." Fook had no objections as Mrs. An Hong quickly prepared an offering. About an hour later, the offering was set up, and she called Fook over. "Since you found her grave and were the first to encounter her ghost, you should pray for her with me." She lit 2 incense sticks and handed one to Fook. Reluctantly, he began to pray aloud. "Spirit of Da Lan, living or deceased, please witness our sincerity. Please do not disturb us or frighten us. We promise to regularly offer prayers to you, please." Before Fook could finish his prayer, the boiled chicken and the fruit platter that were being offered suddenly flew up, scattering all over the floor. Mrs. An Hong panicked. What happened, Fook? Fook himself was bewildered. He intended to pray again, but in his haste, he mistakenly called out the wrong name. Spirit of Hong Han, if you are sacred. Strangely, before he could finish, all the scattered offerings suddenly reappeared back on the platter, as if it had just begun. Both Fook and Mrs. An Hong stared wide-eyed in amazement. Finally, Fook understood why his prayer to the spirit of Da Lan had such a strong reaction. When he mistakenly called out the name of Hong Han, everything had calmed down. Fook said to Mrs. An Hong, "Either there is something unresolved between the deceased and Hong Han, or perhaps Hong Han herself is a ghost." Mrs. An Hong exclaimed, "You can't say that. Hong Han has been here with me for so long, everything has been normal, so how could that be?" Fook didn't want to argue further, so from that moment until evening, he locked himself in his room and instructed Mrs. An Hong. "I had a late breakfast today, so please don't call me for dinner. I will come out to eat when I'm hungry." Instead of resting, Fook did something he had wanted to do for the past few days but hadn't had time for. He moved the wardrobe to the wall on the other side. Although it was quite difficult to pull the heavy wardrobe by himself, after some effort he managed to do it. When he took a broom to sweep the dust from where the wardrobe had been, Fook discovered a small, old piece of paper stuck behind it. He almost swept it away, but some words on the back caught his attention, prompting him to bend down and pick it up. "Da Lan!" Fook exclaimed and almost dropped the paper on the floor. It was a business card belonging to someone named Da Lan, clearly stating her profession and address. After reading through the address, Fook murmured, "Traham area." He recalled that yesterday, while chasing the strange car, he had come close to this address. Could it be? He headed out to his car, much to Mrs. An Hong's surprise. "Yes, I have something to take care of." He drove towards Traham, reciting the house number from the business card. After a while, he arrived at the house, the same one where the female driver he had chased had been. Knowing that Da Lan was deceased, he still asked when he saw an elderly woman coming out of the house. "Excuse me, I would like to ask if this is Da Lan's house?" The elderly woman stared at Fook and then shook her head lightly. "She is not here." "Excuse me, I wanted to ask." "She's dead," she answered curtly and turned to go inside. Fook called out, "Excuse me, I'm not asking about Da Lan." At that moment, the elderly woman turned back, asking in a normal tone, "What do you want to know?" I'm a friend of Hong Han, and she was a friend of Da Lan." "I wanted to." As soon as she heard the name Hong Han, the elderly woman's eyes widened in shock as she stepped back. "What are you to Hong Han?" Fook had made up a story, so he had to continue lying. "I'm a friend." Suddenly, the elderly woman's eyes flashed with anger, and she hissed through gritted teeth, "You filthy, cruel thing! You! She extended her arm and suddenly slapped Fook hard across the face. Caught off guard, he received the blow like a thunderclap. "Why did you hit me?" "I didn't," she yelled. "You get out of here right now! You killed her, and now you dare to show your face again." It seemed she intended to slap him again, but Fook managed to back away just in time and shouted once more, "Why are you doing this?" The elderly woman now held her face, crying out through tears, "Lan, you died, yet you haven't found peace. They come again, what more do they want, oh God?" Fook felt it necessary to clarify. "Excuse me, I didn't know anything about Da Lan. I just happened to come across her grave in the cemetery." The elderly woman still didn't fully believe his explanation, so she looked up and asked, "What are you to Hong Han?" I'm just an ordinary friend." At this point, the tension on her face eased a bit, and after looking at Fook again, her tone softened. "Why are you asking about Da Lan?" "I just wanted to learn more about Hong Han through you." Once again, when she heard Hong Han's name, the elderly woman erupted, "That devil! Don't mention her in front of me." Fook was surprised but started to understand the situation a bit. He had to make up another story. "I'm also a victim of Hong Han. So, Just as Fook thought, her tone changed immediately. What did she do to you? That witch doesn't spare anyone. She pulled Fook into the house. Come in and tell me what that demon did to you. She truly doesn't spare anyone. Fook reluctantly followed her. When they entered the living room, he was startled to see a portrait on the only altar table in the room. It was a portrait of a beautiful girl. Is this Dalan? The elderly woman nodded gently. Yes, that's her. Then she continued in a sad voice. She was only 18, just passed her university entrance exam, and before she could even start studying, she died tragically. If she had died of an illness, I wouldn't be so upset, but she died due to love, for heaven's sake. Fook tried to extract more details. But how is Hong Han involved in this? Every time Fook mentioned Hong Han, the elderly woman would fly into a rage. She is the root cause of my granddaughter's troubles. She is the one who stole the love of that girl, leading Dalan to her death, to her demise. But what is Hong Han to Dalan? A friend or she? The elderly woman opened her mouth to say more but suddenly rolled her eyes back and seemed almost speechless. Fook panicked. Are you okay, ma'am? He had to support her and guide her to lean against the sofa. The elderly woman remained almost in a daze, prompting Fook to call out loudly into the house. Is anyone inside? Help me! Hearing no reply, perhaps she lived alone or her family was out. So, Fook bravely stepped into the house, intending to find some oil to help her. He searched around but didn't find any, and after looking around, he noticed the door slightly ajar and decided to go in. Inside was pitch dark, but Fook managed to turn on the light. Just as he was about to search for the oil, he was startled to see two portraits placed next to each other on a table. One was exactly like the portrait on the altar outside, and the other was a picture of him. Fook felt his heart nearly stop. He trembled, and his legs felt almost paralyzed, so he couldn't move forward or backward. Just then, he heard the elderly woman moaning from the other room. Fook struggled to move, but as he leaned over, he fell to one side. When he regained consciousness, he heard someone asking him in surprise, "Why are you in here?" The one asking was the elderly woman. Fook tried to sit up, but he fell again. At this point, her tone seemed less tense. Are you all right? Fook knew he needed to explain, so he struggled to speak while still dazed. I saw you faint, so I went to find some oil. The elderly woman understood and softened her tone. I woke up and didn't see you, and then I found you lying at the door of my granddaughter's room, so I thought. At that moment, Fook remembered the two portraits he had seen earlier, and when he looked back, he found only Dalan's portrait in front of him. Wait, why did I just see? What did you see? This room has been locked since Dalan died. How did you open it? The door was open. How could I have opened it? The door was open, and I saw two portraits inside. I was so surprised. The elderly woman looked inside and said, What two portraits? There's only Lan's picture. This room is her private space. Since she died, I've left it unchanged, only coming in to dust it occasionally. Fook couldn't believe his eyes, he said. I clearly saw two portraits earlier. The elderly woman firmly stated, There are no other pictures. She casually closed the door and gently reminded Fook. You should go outside and have some water. I wanted to thank you earlier. She was clearly displeased that Fook had entered her private space, especially looking into her granddaughter's room. Fook had to explain once more. I was just anxious to find the oil because I saw you faint. Perhaps afraid that Fook would ask more, the elderly woman quickly stood up and prepared to leave. Fook had no choice but to take his leave. Fook returned to the boarding house and found the landlady waiting at the gate, delivering news. You have a visitor. Fook was surprised. I didn't tell anyone I was here. Who is it, ma'am? The landlady smiled mysteriously. A beautiful girl. You're quite something, thinking you were so gentle. Not knowing what to expect, Fook hurried inside, but when he didn't see anyone in the living room, he asked, Where's my guest? The landlady pointed inside. She asked to come into your room to rest, so I let her. Fook exclaimed. Why did you let a stranger into my room? Who's a stranger? That remark came from someone who had just stepped out of Fook's room. As he turned around, he shouted, Knock Tram! The landlady chuckled. Is this person still a stranger to you? Fook was flustered. But how did you know I was here? The girl, Knock Tram, stepped closer and explained. I spent all afternoon tracking you down. It wasn't too hard, because even though the lad is spacious, there aren't many places to rent, so if you ask around, you'll find it. Then she turned to the landlady and added, See, men are so careless and only think of themselves, not understanding the struggles of others. The landlady interjected. I didn't just let her into your room. When she came here and asked for you by name, I confirmed that I had invited her in, intending for her to wait for you in the living room. But when she showed me the letter you sent when you first arrived in Delat, I understood that she was your fiancée. So when she said she was tired, I didn't hesitate to let her rest in your room. Knowing that Fook would say something to clarify, Knock Tram took the initiative. I brought this for you. Come here and see. At this point, Fook had to make it clear that their shared room was legitimate. Tram is my girlfriend. So may we have a private conversation for a moment, please? The landlady cheerfully replied. No problem. If I thought you were just friends, I'd have to question it, but since you're in love and are engaged, feel free. Stay as long as you want. And if that room is cramped, I can switch you to a larger, more private room upstairs. Fook quickly said. Yes, that's fine, ma'am. Don't be shy. I completely understand young people. Just be yourselves. After she finished, she walked away, allowing Fook to be pulled into the room by his girlfriend. Once inside, Knock Tram immediately closed the door, causing Fook to panic. What are you doing? Knock Tram narrowed her eyes. The landlady has given us permission, so what are you worried about? She hugged Fook and kissed him, making him feel embarrassed. What are you doing? Let me breathe. After a moment of greeting in Tram's style, Fook finally asked, How did you get out of the house to come find me? Why didn't you listen to your parents, and just marry someone else to fulfill your duty? Tram nestled her head against his chest. Hearing that pouting, sarcastic tone is annoying. You're pushing me to get married, right? If I listened and did just that, don't blame me. Fook was still sulking. What would it matter if I did blame you? That's why I chose to give up, to leave and suffer alone. Tram sat up, looking him straight in the eye with a serious expression. Alone or with someone else? How could you say you're alone when you've been going out every day from morning till night? With who? Having been together for 5 years, they were well acquainted. Fook understood that Tram's outward composure masked deep emotional turmoil. Her daring to leave home to come here showed just how strong her love for him was. Fook probed. How are things at home? Tram's expression fell. You're terrible. You get upset over the slightest obstacle and just run away. Do you know, when I heard you were gone, I wanted to leave right away to find you but didn't know how. I had to wait until you wrote a few words saying you were coming to Delat before I felt relieved. As for my parents, you know how it is, it's their decision, not mine. But how could you refuse? Tram looked directly into Fook's eyes. So, being here with you now is not a statement? I love you and only you. Is that clear? Fook hugged his girlfriend tightly and suggested. Tomorrow we'll look for a more convenient place to stay. It's not very comfortable here. But Tram immediately protested. I like this place more. The landlady reminds me of my mom, so being here makes me miss home less and I don't have to worry about other things. Fook was genuinely afraid that Tram might find out about his troubles with Hong Han and Da Long. But what could he do if Tram had made up her mind? That night, while Fook was still shy and hesitant during his first intimate moment with his girlfriend, Tram surprised him. She took the initiative in everything and whispered in Fook's ear. I have to give myself to you completely tonight, so everything will be settled. We belong to each other, and I'm sure you won't leave me anymore. Fook felt like a fool learning to be an adult, even though his instructor wasn't exactly a seasoned expert. By the next morning, they were officially husband and wife. Fook told the landlady, "I'd like to ask if I can rent this place long term. Now I'm not alone anymore." The landlady, Anhong, understood. "I know, so I've prepared a larger room upstairs for you two to move into today." But Nok Tram protested again. "I want to stay in the current room. It's cozy and it has its charm." Fook waved his hand. "No, we have to move upstairs. There are two of us now, not just a single person like her." He slipped up, making Tram confused. "Who's that?" The landlady had to clarify. "Oh, this room was previously rented by a single girl before Fook arrived." "Do you know her?" Fook immediately denied. "I don't know anything. She moved out long before I got here. I only heard the landlady mention it." Tram shot him a sharp glance and then whispered in his ear, "Watch out, don't be wandering." The landlady, noticing Tram's jealousy, leaned in closer to Fook and quietly warned, "You'd better keep things under wraps, otherwise it could get complicated." While Fook was talking to the landlady, Tram was tidying up in the room. Suddenly she called out, "Why is your suitcase under the bed instead of in the closet?" At the mention of the suitcase, Fook rushed in and shouted, "Don't touch that suitcase." But it was too late. Tram had already opened it. Fook felt a rush of panic because Hong Hana's nightgown was still in there. However, when he looked inside, it was empty. Fook sighed in relief, making Tram curious. "What's wrong with you? Are you hiding something in there?" Feeling reassured, Fook boldly said, "Just take a good look to see if there's anything in there. People worry about that suitcase being dirty and getting their hands dirty." Tram wiped the suitcase while saying, "I thought you were hiding love letters in here. I would be furious with you." As Tram put the suitcase away in the closet, Fook wondered, "But the clothes I left in there were clearly there?" At this moment, Fook realized he needed to be firm if he didn't want to encounter more problems. "I've thought this through, my dear. I've been sleeping in this room for several nights, and some nights I can hear insects buzzing outside the window, making it hard to sleep. It would be better to move upstairs, as it's more private and avoids the noise." He approached the landlady. "I'll be moving upstairs." An Hong looked at Fook with a hint of surprise but accepted right away. "It's up to you." Nok Tram didn't really like the idea, but since Fook made a good point, she had to agree. Fortunately, the upstairs room was indeed more spacious and airy, and the window didn't face the backyard like the downstairs room. Feeling relieved, Fook said, "This room is much better." Feeling like a burden had been lifted, Fook exhaled deeply and urged Tram, "Let's go out for breakfast. Then we can go explore a bit. Since we arrived here, I haven't gone anywhere." Tram pouted. "Liar! The landlady said you go out every day. So, where do you actually go?" "Well, it's different between running errands and going out for fun. I've just been visiting a few acquaintances." Tram, being suspicious, pressed for more details. "Where do these acquaintances live? Why don't you take me there? I want to get to know them too." Fook had to find a way to deflect her. "I've been searching for 2 days and haven't met anyone. Their addresses seem to be inaccurate." "Show me the addresses. I'm much better at finding places than you." As she spoke, Tram slipped her hand into Fook's pocket, where she knew he kept everything. She discovered a business card inside. Fook froze, quickly trying to block her hand while stammering, "This is from a friend." Tram grew even more suspicious and quickly pulled her hand out, taking the card with her. She held it up to see and was surprised. "Who's the address for?" Fook grabbed it immediately, his heart racing. But he was even more surprised to find that the pristine business card had no writing on it at all. Clearly, this was the business card with Dao Lan's name and address. "Why is the card blank that you left in your pocket?" Fook breathed a sigh of relief once more. He couldn't even think of why this was happening when Tram added, "Lucky you. If it was some girl's business card, you'd better watch out." Tram teased, making Fuchs' heart skip a beat. He wondered, why is this so weird? He made an excuse to go to the bathroom and pulled out the business card to check again. This time he was shocked, as the old writing was clearly visible, Da Lan. What's going on? Without hesitation, Fuchs tore the business card into pieces and tossed it into the toilet, flushing it away. After finishing, his heart was still racing. He stepped out and urged Tram. Hurry up, it's getting late. After several rounds of checks that Fuchs passed smoothly, Tram loved him even more, so as soon as they hit the street, she clung tightly to him, as if afraid he would run off with someone else. Fuchs silently lamented, because with things like this, searching for anything about Hong Han or Dao Lan seemed incredibly difficult. He suggested, let's stop by Tui Ta for coffee and breakfast. It's lovely to sit there in the morning looking out at the lake. All morning at Tui Ta, it was mostly Tram's monologue as she kept insisting. I've decided this time we'll stay here, no need to go anywhere else. I like the climate of Dalat more. Fuchs just nodded. That's fine. But I prefer Nha Trang. There's the sea, the islands. Waiting for the sun to rise higher, the two called for the bill to walk up Doitsu. But when Fuchs reached into his pocket to pay, he was startled to find the business card intact. Didn't we just tear that up? Fuchs thought to himself, certain that this wasn't that card, but he didn't dare pull it out. Seeing him hesitate, Tram asked, Did you forget to bring money? Fuchs had to lie. I forgot. Tram took money from her own pocket to pay and joked. If you're with me, I'll cover it. If you were with someone else, wouldn't that be embarrassing? Fuchs brushed it off. I spent all my money yesterday and forgot to take more this morning. In reality, there was money in his pocket along with the business card, but Fuchs was afraid that pulling both out would cause trouble. Before leaving the cafe, Fuchs found another excuse to go to the bathroom. I've got a bit of a stomach ache, just wait for me a moment. Once inside the restroom, after locking the door, Fuchs pulled out the business card to look at it again and turned pale, because it was indeed Da Lan's card. Standing dazed for a moment, Fuchs once again tore the paper into shreds. He didn't have time to throw it into the toilet before he heard a knock on the door and Tram's soft voice. I have a stomach ache too, hurry up and let me in. Fuchs had no choice but to throw the torn pieces of paper out the window, knowing it would fall onto the surface of the lake. He opened the door, feeling awkward. Luckily, Tram was in a hurry and stepped out into the yard before Fuchs could regain his composure. He murmured, Why is this happening? Or... Suddenly he broke out in a sweat, the fear creeping in as if he were facing a terrifying ghost. It wasn't until Tram stepped out that Fuchs managed to regain his calm, quickly pulling her along. Let's go home. I'm feeling really uncomfortable. At that moment, Fuchs looked pale and exhausted. Tram had to speak up. Do you need to go to the hospital? Look at you. Fuchs waved his hand. No need. Let's go home. Fuchs drove unsteadily as if he were drunk, and it took them a lot of effort to finally get home. But as soon as they entered the door, the landlady said, Someone from Saigon came by looking for Nha Tram. Is that you? I can't remember clearly, so I told them to wait, but they were in a hurry and gave me this address, asking you to go there immediately. They need to meet urgently. Taking the paper, Tram read it aloud to Fuchs. Dong Street, Traham. As soon as Fuchs heard that, he couldn't hold back, exclaiming, Why is it Traham? Suddenly Tram looked scared and flustered. I need to go right away. Fuchs panicked. Let me go with you. But Tram firmly said, You're sick, you can't go. Let me drive, this is important. Without waiting for Fuchs to agree, she grabbed the car keys and quickly started the engine, driving away fast. Once outside, Tram calmed down a bit, feeling a little out of control, murmuring, Why am I going? Who is at this address? In fact, Tram didn't know anyone at that address at all. And the letter didn't even have a signature, yet after reading it, Tram felt anxious, as if she was being compelled to go. Not knowing the way, Tram had to ask for directions several times before finally finding her way to Traham. The address she found was indeed Dalan's house. But when she knocked on the door, it wasn't the elderly woman who welcomed Fook the day before. It was a very beautiful girl. As soon as she saw Tram, she exclaimed, "You're right on time." Tram was invited into the house, and the girl introduced herself. "I'm Dalan. And you must be Nak Tram?" Tram was surprised. "How do you know me? And what's the reason for inviting me here? Are you afraid I'll speak the truth?" "Well, if I don't know what truth you're going to tell, why should I be afraid? What do you want to talk about?" The girl, identifying herself as Dalan, spoke clearly. "I want you to meet someone. That person is currently giving your husband a headache because of her, and if you're not careful, that guy Fook will be the next victim. I know we don't know each other yet, but I'm here to save you from danger. Do you believe me?" Tram was taken aback, but being stubborn by nature and not liking to be intimidated, she replied, "You say I'm in danger? Specifically, how?" The girl took a small bag from her fabric bag and showed it to Tram. "Do you think this outfit is beautiful?" Looking at the silk nightgown for women, Tram was surprised. "Who does it belong to? And why are you showing it to me?" "I won't say who this belongs to because the person who will tell you won't be me." "Then who is it?" She smiled mysteriously. "You'll find out." Tram found the girl's ambiguous attitude annoying, so she stood up. "I thought you were a real acquaintance of mine, calling me here for something important, but it turns out to be nonsense. I'll excuse myself." Just as Tram was about to leave, she suddenly heard the words, "I want you to meet someone named Hong Han, a girl whose ghost is threatening the happiness between you and the one you love." Tram turned back, her eyes wide in shock. "You mean, my husband and that girl?" She scoffed. "That's something you'll see for yourself. It's better to assess it than to listen to me. Keep this outfit and bring it back to your husband to see and ask him who it belongs to. Then you'll hear him speak. After he confirms, he'll direct you to where you can meet your rival." After finishing her sentence, the girl walked back into the house and didn't come out for a long time. Waiting anxiously, Tram began to look around the house. When her gaze landed on the altar, seeing the portrait on it made her heart leap. She is. The person she just saw and the one in the picture were one and the same. So, Tram wanted to scream, but she could hardly summon the strength to do so. At that moment, she was sweating profusely as if it were the height of summer in a sweltering region, even though it was now the autumn of misty delight. After a long while, Tram finally managed to speak. "Excuse me." But she could only utter those few words. Gathering all her strength, she clutched the outfit and dashed out the gate. Driving in an even worse state than Fook in the morning, Tram barely made it home, only to be completely shocked when the landlady told her, "Fook just caught a ride out, saying he was going to look for you." Tram, exhausted, immediately screamed upon hearing this. "Oh no, if he goes there, he will die." The landlady didn't understand, so she asked, "Who do you mean will die?" "Fook." "Oh, I'm so tired that I can't go back there. Please help me. Go call Fook back immediately. If not." Tram could only say that much before collapsing on the floor. The landlady, Mrs. An Hong, panicked and rushed to help her up, intending to carry her into the room. But Tram regained consciousness just in time and, gasping for breath, said, It's a ghost." Mrs. An Hong thought Tram was delirious, so she asked again, "What are you talking about?" "A ghost." "She's a ghost." "Who is?" "Dalan." After saying that, Tram seemed to lose all awareness. Mrs. An Hong tried various methods, but Tram wouldn't wake up. She had no choice but to lay her on the sofa and wait for Fook to return. Suddenly, noticing the silk clothes Tram was holding, the landlady screamed in terror. Hong Han's clothes. Even though she was fainting, the moment Tram heard the name, Hong Han, she sat up instantly and asked in confusion, "Where is Hong Han?" Mrs. An Hong, bewildered, asked, "You know Hong Han too?" "Hong Han? Find Hong Han for me." Tram shouted so loudly that she exhausted herself, falling back into the same semi-conscious state as before. Mrs. Anhong picked up the silk clothes and inspected them, her hands trembling as she stammered. These clothes, these things only bring harm. Fook said he threw them away, so why are they here now? And why does this girl have them? She remembered the previous troubles caused by the clothes, and the sight of them now made her feel as if she were seeing a ghost. Instinctively, she threw them out the window. But suddenly, a scream rang out from outside, from the direction of the clothes. When Mrs. Anhong looked, she was horrified. The old dog, which usually slept under the plum tree, had been hit by the clothes, and its skull had been shattered, just as if it had been crushed by 100-pound weight. Terrified, Mrs. Anhong ran back into the house, trembling. "Oh my God! Fook! Fook!" She managed to get to the door of the room before collapsing there. When Fook returned home, it was already dark. He stepped into the living room, surprised to find no lights on and the door wide open. He turned on the lights and was shocked to see Tram lying motionless on the sofa. "Tram! What's wrong?" He shook her, but she didn't wake up, so he quickly carried her to her room. Opening the door while holding her weight, Fook didn't have time to turn on the light and carried Tram straight to the bed. After laying her down, he went back to turn on the light. And then... What? On the bed, it wasn't just Tram. There was another person, a beautiful girl, lying comfortably as if it were her own room. "Who are you?" "You're asking who I am? I'm the one who came to retrieve my forgotten clothes." Fook's heart sank. "Hong Han." The girl sitting on the bed pointed at Tram. "Your girlfriend came here to harm me? I thought you were a good person. That's why I invited you here and even showed you the grave of someone I'm concerned about. But instead, you bring this girl here, and she conspires with others to harm me." Fook was confused. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." "Then where are my clothes?" Fook stammered. I left them in the room, and then... Then you gave them to Delan, right? That's why the two of you have been visiting her house so often." "No. I just... Don't lie." Her voice was so loud that it startled Tram awake. She groggily asked, "Who are you talking to?" Fook was terrified, stammering, I just... But when he looked again, the girl was gone. At that moment, Tram sat up, looked around, and exclaimed, "Did you bring someone into this room? I can still smell a woman's fragrance here. This smell is so familiar." "Yes, it's the scent of the silk clothes I brought home." Fook became even more frightened. "What clothes are you talking about?" As soon as Fook finished asking, something suddenly flew in through the window and landed right in front of them. Looking down, Fook shouted, "The clothes!" It was the same clothes that Mrs. Anhong had thrown out earlier. As soon as Fook saw them, he wanted to grab them, but Tram stopped him. "That's why she said to bring them back here, and you'll know whose they are." "So, they belong to you?" "No. Knowing how jealous Tram could be, Fook quickly explained everything. Still, it seemed Tram didn't believe him. She pressed further. "If you didn't know anything about her, why were you following her?" Fook honestly replied, "I don't know why either. It felt like I was being controlled. Even going to the cemetery wasn't really my choice." Tram, unaware of the incident with the dog earlier, grabbed the clothes and shoved them toward Fook's face. "Smell them, is this the same scent as earlier?" Fook had no choice but to confess. "She was just here." Tram, confused, asked, "What do you mean? Did you bring her into the room while I was unconscious?" "Oh my God!" Fook, panicking, replied. "No. She appeared." Tram was startled. She's a ghost?" Though he wasn't entirely sure, Fook nodded. "I think so." Fook had just finished speaking when a voice came from outside the window. "Holding the clothes without wearing them will not spare you from death," Tram stubbornly replied. "Who wants to wear someone else's clothes?" Two sharp slaps echoed in quick succession. As Fook flinched in surprise, Tram staggered, clutching her face and screaming. Blood began to trickle from the corner of her mouth. Fook panicked. "What happened?" Tram cried out. "Why did you hit me?" Fook shook his head vigorously. "I didn't. I swear I didn't hit you." 2 more slaps followed, knocking Tram onto the bed. This time, she realized it wasn't Fook. Her face turned pale as she muttered, "Then, who hit me?" Fook, understanding the situation, spoke loudly. "I apologize to you. My wife spoke out of turn, but she meant no harm. Please forgive her." The voice responded. "Put it on." To Fook's surprise, Tram became oddly compliant. She started changing into the clothes right in front of him without any hesitation. Even stranger, the silk clothes fit her perfectly. Fook couldn't help but blurt out, "You look beautiful." Noticing something bulging in the pocket, Tram reached in and pulled out a white handkerchief. Written in red ink was a message: "Go to this address and follow their instructions exactly." "Let me see that, what is it?" Fook asked. He grabbed the handkerchief, but when he looked at it, the writing had vanished. Tram was equally shocked. "But the writing was just here." They both stared at each other, feeling a sudden chill. Tram, her voice trembling, said, "I'm so scared. I don't think I can go anywhere." As soon as she finished speaking, 2 more slaps struck her, even harder this time. Fear consumed her, and she practically begged, "Please stop, I'll do whatever you say." She looked at Fook for help, and he, equally lost, could only respond, "Do you remember the address? I'll take you there." Following the address written on the handkerchief, Fook drove around several times but still couldn't find the place. Finally, he stopped the car to ask an old man driving a horse carriage, "Sir, could you please tell me where Waiting Street is?" Upon hearing Fook's question, the old man burst out laughing. "Whoever gave you that address is testing your wits. There's no such street in this city," Tram blurted out. "Could it be a ghost address?" The old man replied. "The address isn't for ghosts, but it's the place where ghosts live." He laughed again before continuing. "The address is real, but the street name is meant to puzzle you. So, do you still want to go there?" Without hesitation, Tram quickly responded, "Yes, I have to go." The old man's tone turned serious. "That's the city cemetery. People jokingly call it the City of Waiting. Now you understand, right?" After answering, the old man cracked his whip, and the horse took off. Fook looked at Tram, muttering to himself, "I've been there before. That's where Dalan's grave is." A little while later, Fook stopped the car in front of the cemetery gate. When he checked the address at the entrance, it was just as the old man had said. Hesitating for a moment, Tram urged him, "Let's go in and take a look." Reluctantly, Fook followed her, his mind clouded with confusion. Tram seemed as though someone was guiding her, walking quickly and occasionally turning back to urge him, "Hurry up!" Having been through the cemetery several times, Fook had no trouble following her. However, when Tram ventured deep into the area where rows of graves lined up, Fook felt compelled to ask, "Why are you going so far in?" "I'm looking for Hong Hana's grave." From behind, watching Tram in Hong Hana's silk outfit, Fook suddenly felt like it wasn't Tram, but Han. It wasn't until Tram stopped in front of a grave that Fook snapped out of his thoughts. "Is this?" Before he could finish, Tram stepped aside, revealing the inscription on the gravestone, "Nguyen Hong Han, deceased on." Fook gasped. "She's buried here." Tram, unbothered, as if she already knew, said, "You're the only one who believed she was still alive. Now will you help me?" Fook, bewildered, asked, "Help with what?" Without warning, Tram knelt in front of the grave. Seeing Fook still standing, she urged, "Hurry up." Fook, confused, asked, "Why should we kneel?" Suddenly, as if someone struck him hard behind the knees, Fook collapsed into a kneeling position. Tram glanced at him and nodded. "That's right." Her voice sounded oddly unfamiliar, prompting Fook to ask, "Why doesn't your voice sound like you?" "What do you mean? Who do I sound like then?" Fook racked his brain, trying to remember whose voice this resembled. Finally it hit him. Hong Han! The one lying in this grave is now, your knock Tram. Now make an offering and ask for her permission for us to be wed from today onward. Quickly, before it's too late. Before Fook could decide what to do, as if driven by some force, he instinctively said, We swear to be together for life, never parting, even in death. Tram smiled at him, satisfied. That's enough, she added. Thank you. Tram has helped me avoid a great calamity. From now on, I'll use her body to return to life and will take care of your beloved as she did. Rest assured, if you adored her before, with me, you'll love even more. With that, she leaned on Fook, and like a lifeless shell, collapsed in his arms. Startled, Fook cried out, Tram! What's happening to you? She remained motionless, and her skin felt cold as ice. Panicking, Fook scooped her up and rushed toward the gate. But as he passed the caretaker's house, a voice called out, Bring her in here, quickly! You don't have much time! Fook had no choice but to carry Tram inside. The caretaker's small house had a bed where Fook laid her down. Afterward, the old man pulled Fook aside and said, Why did you take your beloved there? Don't you know whose grave that was? Fook feigned ignorance. We were just visiting a friend's grave and happened to pass by. That grave belongs to a girl who was involved in a massacre on the Pine Hill not long ago. Haven't you heard? Fook shook his head. No, I'm from out of town, so I didn't know. That was Hong Hana's grave. She and another girl, Da Lan, had a personal grudge, and they led each other to the Pine Hill near Twin Lam Lake. There, in a fit of rage, they clung to each other and rolled down a deep ravine, both dying. After a pause, the old man continued. I was chopping wood nearby when I stumbled upon the scene. I tried climbing down to save them, but it was too late. They were both dead. Using their ID papers, I informed their families. Da Lan's relatives came to claim her body for burial at Treham. But when I tried contacting Hong Hana's family, I learned they had moved away long ago. Left with no other option, I buried her next to Da Lan's grave, thinking it would be appropriate since they died together. Little did I know it would create such trouble that I lost sleep for days. Shuddering, the old man recounted, prompting Fook to ask, What happened? Late at night, I'd hear the sounds of a fierce fight outside. When I opened the door, there they were, the two girls, pulling each other's hair and fighting furiously. To my shock, it was the same two corpses I had buried. They had risen from their graves to continue their battle. He paused to catch his breath, clearly exhausted by the memory. After a moment, he resumed. And it didn't just happen once. Every few nights, the fight would start again. Their hatred must have been so intense that even in death, their spirits couldn't let it go. I eventually decided to move one of the graves to a different plot, hoping that keeping them apart would stop the fighting. Luckily, my intuition was correct. After relocating Da Lan's grave, there were no more fights. However, Hong Hana's spirit remained restless. She would scream through the cemetery every night, clearly still harboring resentment. That's why, for years now, I've placed a fresh bouquet of flowers on her grave daily, which seems to calm her down. But appeasing her anger stirred up Da Lan. Her spirit started demanding a yellow gladiolus bouquet on her grave, and I had no choice but to comply. Fook murmured. No wonder there's always a fresh bouquet of yellow gladiolus on her grave. There was also a bouquet of yellow roses on Hong Han's grave, but for some reason, the bouquet on Han's grave had just disappeared. To this day, I'm still puzzled. As the cemetery caretaker was speaking, Tram suddenly stirred, mumbling something unclear, prompting Fook to lean closer and ask, Are you awake? The voice that whispered into Fook's ear wasn't Tram's. Find a way to keep him here, and you run quickly to Da Lan's grave, Take the flowers there and place them on my grave. Do it quickly if you still hope to be with me, otherwise. Her voice became hurried and full of fear, urging Fook into action. He pretended and told the old man. I left something by the grave, could you keep an eye on her for me? Don't let her wake up and run away. Without waiting for the caretaker's reply, Fook dashed off. He knew where Delanne's grave was and reached it easily. On the grave was a bouquet of gladiolus as usual. He grabbed it immediately and ran towards Hong Han's grave. As soon as he placed the bouquet down, Fook heard a mournful wail coming from Delanne's grave. Without hesitation, Fook hurried back to the caretaker's house. Upon seeing him, the old man said right away, Your friend woke up, she wanted to leave, but I didn't let her. Fook stepped inside and froze. For in front of him wasn't Tram anymore, but Hong Han! You! She covered her face with her hand and gestured for Fook to leave quickly. Fook had to find a way to say, Thank you for your help, we'll be going now. He helped her walk out of the cemetery gate. They drove quite a distance before Fook sighed in relief. He glanced at her, worried. What am I supposed to tell the landlady? She calmly replied, Don't worry. Don't you remember I stayed there for months before? The landlady had no idea I was a ghost, so there's nothing to fear. But what about my girlfriend? How am I going to explain this to her or to everyone else? She suddenly burst out laughing. You worry too much. How about this? As she spoke, Fook was once again stunned. She laughed again. Still calling me you? Right in front of Fook was Nok Tram. Only her voice was different. She then explained. I've escaped my fate, so now I can live with you. Sometimes I'll be Hong Han, and when necessary I'll still be your Nok Tram. Fook could only sneak glances at her, but she looked exactly like Nok Tram. Relieved, he said. Let's go home. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to move somewhere else. She still stuck to her original idea. I still like staying there. That's where I disguised myself and waited for you, so I'm used to it. Fook widened his eyes. You waited for me? What do you mean? I knew you would come, so I laid in wait for you. People from the underworld know everything about the future. I even knew that Nok Tram's fate was sealed, and that's why she sought you out. That gave me the chance to use her soul to deceive my enemies. Is it Da Lan? Why do you and she harbor such deep hatred? She didn't answer but pointed to the left and said, Drive this way, and everything will become clear. Fook hesitated for a moment, but she quickly grabbed the steering wheel and sharply turned it in the direction she had indicated. The car swerved abruptly, almost hitting the curb, but she calmly corrected the course with ease, and they continued down a path leading toward Twin Lam Lake. When they arrived in front of a house nestled deep in a garden full of fruit-bearing trees, she commanded, Drive inside and park the car. Fook obeyed, and after turning off the engine, she told him again, Go inside. She walked ahead and disappeared into the house. Fook followed her slowly, but upon entering, he found no trace of her. Instead, there was a small, simply furnished but tidy living room. The first thing that caught Fook's attention stunned him. Hong Han! A portrait of Hong Han was placed on the altar in the middle of the room, leaving Fook speechless. He turned around, trying to find Hong Han, but she was nowhere to be seen, and when he called for her, there was no answer. While he was still in shock, a voice spoke behind him. She's gone. There's no point in looking for her. Fook turned around and was surprised to see an elderly woman. She pointed to the altar and continued. You already know. She's dead, and the one who came with you was just her spirit in another's body. That could only happen outside, but here in her home, her physical form can exist. Though the old woman was frail and elderly, she spoke with sharpness and clarity. Fook felt a bit flustered. Ma'am, I just came here with her. She just walked into the house. She left right away. Now sit down. What she wanted you to know, I will help you understand. Fook hesitated and asked, Ma'am, who are you? I am her mother. She was my youngest daughter. Yes, ma'am. My name is Fook. Actually, I wasn't Hong Hana's boyfriend, but... The old woman cut him off. You don't need to say it, I already know. My daughter may have died, but her spirit lives on. She lives to seek revenge. Fook had heard this from Hong Han before, so he interjected. In that case, isn't everything over now? She's already achieved what she had long wanted. Da Lan has been. The old woman suddenly became alarmed. You know about that? But she didn't say anything to me before she left. Then the old woman, as if relieved to unburden herself, began to speak. She was in the prime of her youth, and in love, yet she died tragically, unjustly, all because of a fight over a man. And to make it worse, the person she fought was her own half-sister. This was the first time Fook had heard the full story, and though he didn't want to involve himself in their deep-seated hatred, curiosity got the better of him. Are you saying Hong Han and Da Lan were sisters? The old woman continued bitterly. Though they were called sisters, they had only known each other for less than a month before the tragedy occurred. Per Han, she had never been in love before, and this was her first time falling for someone. Yet she met with misfortune right away. Sensing the old woman's openness, Fook gently inquired. Who was Hana's lover, ma'am? What did he do? Who was he? The old woman shook her head slightly. I never met him, only heard her speak of him. But I know she loved him deeply. He was an architect, very handsome, they say. Probably someone like you. He came here from Saigon. His name was Duk. His full name was Fook Duk. As soon as she mentioned the name, Fook reacted as if struck by lightning. What did you say? Fook Duk? The old woman stood up abruptly and went into the next room. She returned moments later with a half-body portrait, handing it to Fook. This is Hana's lover. But he looks just like you. Fook took the photo, and the moment he saw it, he exclaimed in shock. On Duk! His entire body trembled as if struck by a sudden chill, and even the old woman was startled. What's happening to you? Fook spoke as if in a daze. Why him? Why is he involved in this? The old woman examined Fook closely and then gasped in surprise. It's him, isn't it? She snatched the photo from Fook's hands and placed it back on Hong Hana's altar, praying fervently. My daughter, if you still have your spirit, come back and witness this. Today, the one responsible for your suffering has come to our house to atone for his sins. Tell me, what should I do? Fook hurried to the altar, falling to his knees and bowing repeatedly, pleading. Our whole family has suffered since losing you. We've searched for you everywhere, consulted countless monks and priests, but to no avail. Who would have thought you were here all along? Why didn't you come back to us on high? As he bowed for the first time, he heard a familiar voice faintly in his ear. They think you're Duk, and that's why they dragged you into this. They fought over their love for Duk, your older brother. From now on and forevermore, he will stay here, become a part of this family, and forget all about you, Fook. That voice was Nak Tram's. Thinking she was standing beside him, Fook turned to look, but no one was there. It seemed as though the words were meant only for him. The old woman remained unmoved, showing no sign of reaction. Tram! Fook suddenly cried out, which caused him to fall backward. At that moment, a wail and Nak Tram's desperate words echoed. Marry me! Only then can we be together. You'll live, and so will I. Do it now. Then everything went silent. It seemed as if, in the unseen world, someone was dragging Nak Tram away. Her sobs grew fainter and fainter. The carriage driver stopped in front of An Hong's house and called out, Madam, come and get your guest. An Hong, who had been watering plants in the garden, rushed to the gate and was startled to see Fook lying in the carriage. Fook! What happened to him? The old carriage driver explained. I was passing by the old cemetery on the western side of town when I found him lying by the roadside. I stopped and heard him mutter your address before he fainted. I brought him here to see if you recognized him. An Hong, panic-stricken, cried. Of course I recognize him. He's staying with me. Please help me carry him inside. Oh my God, what has happened to him? As they helped Fook into the house, the old driver remarked. That cemetery hasn't been used for new burials in ages. It's full of old graves, and it's haunted. People keep getting scared there. What on earth was he doing out there to end up like this? Did he go to the cemetery? The old man shook his head and responded. I didn't see him enter the cemetery myself, but there are no houses in that area, and if he was standing at the cemetery gate, where else would he go? Then he continued. It's strange how young people these days seem to be drawn to cemeteries. Just a few days ago, a young woman also asked me to take her to the new cemetery in the east, where they call it the City of Waiting. She went in early in the morning and didn't come out for a long time. Mrs. Anhong sighed. This young man rented a house here with his lover. This morning, they both went out and disappeared. I've been waiting, but they haven't come back. And now this has happened, but where is his girlfriend? What happened to her? Feeling that it was awkward for Fook to lie in the middle of the living room, she asked the old man to help. Since you've helped already, could you please help carry him to his own room? I'll pay you for your trouble. They carried Fook to an upstairs room. As soon as the door opened, Mrs. Anhong gasped. Look, it's Tram. Nok Tram was lying on the bed as if she were asleep. Startled by the shout, she sat up in confusion. What's going on, Mrs.? She suddenly saw Fook and cried out. Oh my! Still unconscious, Fook suddenly woke up, and without a word, he hugged Tram tightly, unwilling to let go. Mrs. Anhong asked. Where did you both go? While he was lost in the cemetery, you returned here without me noticing. Tram's face still showed shock, but as she felt the warmth of her lover's embrace, she gradually calmed down and muttered. It's over, the nightmare is over. Mrs. Anhong, not hearing clearly, asked. What did you say? Tram held Fook even tighter, as if afraid he would disappear. I thought I had lost him forever. Heaven and earth have spared us. At that moment, Fook finally spoke. Is it really you, Nok Tram? Yes, it's me. It's really me. It's really Tram's voice, not her body possessed by Hong Hana's spirit as before. Overjoyed, Fook exclaimed. It's truly you. Let's leave this place right away, Tram. Tram whispered softly, just enough for him to hear. We can't leave yet. Though I've returned to you, I'm still trapped in the afterlife. I haven't reached my time to die, so even though my soul was captured, I still have a chance to reunite with you if you marry me now. Perform the wedding ceremony, and they won't be able to take my soul away. Do it, my love! But who are they? She replied quickly, as if afraid someone would hear. Those two girls, don't you remember? Da Lan and Hong Han. Yes, that's them. They are half-sisters who both fell in love with the same man, who happens to be your long-lost brother. After killing each other, they continued fighting over him in the afterlife. They mistook you for him, and wanted to eliminate you to have you all to themselves. One of them nearly succeeded, but when you mentioned your brother's photo, revealing the truth, Hong Han became furious and attacked my spirit, driving me away, allowing me to escape. Marry me now, and they will leave us alone. I'm certain of it. Fook turned to beg Mrs. Anhong. Please help us. Can you officiate our wedding? Mrs. Anhong nodded gently. All right. I'm ready to help. Fook and Tram thought their rushed wedding would just be a simple formality to appease the spirits. But Mrs. Anhong organized a grand event. In addition to her private guests, many people came from Saigon. When asked how they knew about the wedding, most answered the same. Someone called and told us, so we rushed over. During the ceremony, two elderly women appeared. As soon as Tram and Fook saw them, they were horrified. How are they here? The women were the mothers of Da Lan and Hong Han. Not only did they arrive together, but they held hands and approached the bride and groom, offering congratulations. Congratulations to both of you. Fook stammered. How did you? Hong Hana's mother spoke first. We came to take our daughters home. They've come to understand, and so have we. happiness belongs to those who truly deserve it. Our daughters loved the wrong person and suffered a tragic fate, and they must bear the consequences. Involving you two was wrong, and they have decided to return what rightfully belongs to you. They will go in search of that man, your brother." Fook blurted out. "My brother has been missing for a long time. He may have died too. They can probably find him in the afterlife." The mother said something that startled both the bride, groom, and the landlady. "Let us take our daughters' bodies home." After speaking, they went upstairs to Fook and Tram's room. The couple, along with Mrs. An Hong, followed in shock. When they opened the door, they were astonished to find two lifeless bodies lying side by side in the room. Both Tram and Fook cried out, "Hong Han! Da Lan!" The two bodies were the girls who had caused them so much trouble in the past few days. Seeing their presence now terrified them. "What should we do now?" But the two mothers calmly said, "It's all right. We came to take them home. The fact that they appeared like this means they no longer hold any grudges. After all, they were sisters by blood." They reached out and touched the bodies. Suddenly, the two corpses disappeared, leaving behind a yellow rose and a golden gladiolus in each mother's hand. Silently, the two mothers left the wedding, turning back only to say, "Wishing you both a lifetime of happiness." Then, like mist, they vanished into thin air. Hong received the news of his uncle's passing more than 2 months ago, but he still couldn't return due to being stuck with his graduation exams and the long distance. Only today did he manage to board a flight back home, filled with memories of his beloved uncle, whom he cherished like a father. His father had died early, so throughout his childhood, he was closely bonded with his uncle, who also played a crucial role in Hong's growth and his study abroad journey. Therefore, when he heard the news of his uncle's death and couldn't return, Hong felt a deep sense of regret for a whole month afterward. After more than 5 hours on the plane, as soon as he landed at the airport, Hong hired a car to go straight back to his hometown, which is over 100 kilometers from the city. The driver expressed concern for him. "It's already past 8 p.m. Why don't you rest at a hotel and go back tomorrow morning?" Hong smiled lightly. "I have urgent business." He took the opportunity to lean back on the seat and tried to nap for a while. But just a few minutes later, he was jolted awake as the driver suddenly braked hard, muttering under his breath, "Are you crazy?" Hong opened his eyes and asked, "What's going on?" Pointing to the side of the road, the driver replied, "I couldn't stop in time. She could have died." He briefly saw a figure in a white dress standing helplessly by the roadside, and Hong was surprised. "That girl? She suddenly dashed out from the sidewalk to block my car. If I hadn't braked in time, who knows what would have happened?" Before Hong could voice any opinion, he saw the girl approaching the car, mumbling something he couldn't quite catch. He asked, "What did she say?" The driver seemed displeased. "She asked for a ride?" Noticing that the girl was carrying a large, heavy suitcase, Hong felt sympathy. "She must be returning home and can't catch a ride." The driver shook his head vigorously. "These days, who has the energy to trust these girls? There are so many scammers." But Hong suddenly made a decision. "Just ask her where she's going." Without waiting for the driver to inquire, Hong rolled down the window and leaned out to ask, "Do you want a ride?" The girl brightened up. "Yes, I'm going to Vin Long, but there are no more buses at this hour. I've been trying to flag one down but no luck. As a girl, I don't know what to do." Hong looked at her. Even in the dark, he could see her graceful and innocent features. He said, "I'm also heading to Vin Long, so you can come along. There's still room in the car." He turned to the driver. "Let her ride with us. We can help each other out." The driver continued to grumble. "You're asking for trouble." But Hong insisted. "I'm not worried, just drive." Hong personally got out, opened the car door, and invited, "Come sit in the back with me. We're from the same region." The girl felt a bit shy about sitting next to a stranger, but Hong reassured her. "I just returned from studying abroad, so I'm used to Western manners." There's nothing to be afraid of sitting together while keeping our own space. The driver noticed Hong's cheerful demeanor, so the girl stepped in. Hong instructed, "Please put her suitcase in the trunk to make room." At first, the driver was not fond of the girl, but when he got a good look at her, he was taken aback by her beauty and kindness, which made him warm up to her. After stowing the suitcase, the driver asked, "How long have you been waiting for a ride?" "More than an hour, and every car refused. But I wasn't asking for a free ride." Not understanding her point, Hong asked again, "What do you mean by that?" The driver explained, "She means she's willing to pay for a ride." Hong looked at her, surprised by her unexpected beauty, and exclaimed, You are. "I'm Nakha. I study in Saigon, and I'm going home for the summer. Earlier, you mentioned you were willing to pay for a ride. So, if I said I don't want anyone riding with me but would pay the driver instead, what would you think?" The girl remained calm, showing no signs of embarrassment. "That's what I said to those who refused to give me a ride, but as for this car, I wouldn't dare think that." Her confident way of speaking made Hong feel closer to her. "You said you're from Vinlong, but specifically where?" "Right in the town, about a kilometer away," Hong exclaimed. "Near Thay Tu's Longan Garden?" The girl was surprised. "You know that place?" Hong laughed. "Because Thay Tu's garden is my family's land." Now it was her turn to exclaim. "So, we're neighbors." It turned out that her house was right next to Hong's family garden. Although she only returned home occasionally, Hong remembered seeing the large tiled house next door, realizing it belonged to her. "It's a small world. But how come I've never met you before?" "I only come home occasionally." Their conversation grew warmer and more lively. Hong felt excited thinking that this summer, he would have a new friend right next door. He proposed, "Do you have free time this week, Nakha? We could organize a trip along the Ko Chien River to enjoy ourselves." She seemed thoughtful. "Let me think about it. I'll get back to you tomorrow. I have some things to take care of." "That's fine. We still have a few months of summer left." Just as the car passed back my Thuan, she asked to get off. "I need to stop by my grandmother's house, then I'll head home in the afternoon. My grandmother lives by Truong and Bridge. Could you please stop here?" After she got out of the car, Hong continued to watch her until her figure disappeared behind the trees along the road. The driver seemed to understand his passenger's feelings. "She's really beautiful, isn't she?" Hong couldn't help but reply. "She is indeed. You're quite lucky." Hong was puzzled. "Lucky for what?" "Lucky to have such a beautiful person hitching a ride with you." Noticing her jacket left on the seat, Hong exclaimed, "She forgot her jacket." The driver, who was quite perceptive, said, "Girls forget things when sitting with guys for one of two reasons: either they're too nervous or they're doing it on purpose, and that gives you a chance to meet her again." When the car arrived home quite late, Hong still asked the driver to stop in front of Nakha's house to observe carefully. Although their properties were adjacent, the entrance to this house faced a different direction, so to get from his uncle's house to hers required a bit of a walk. "That's her house." Hong spoke abruptly, causing the driver to misunderstand and ask, "You mean this house?" Hong pointed ahead. "That house over there." Returning home at midnight made his family both happy and surprised. Aunt Ba scolded Hong. "Why didn't you send a telegram to let us know you were back, so the whole family could go to Saigon to pick you up?" Hong pointed to the driver. "This uncle picked me up, and that's enough," he then said. "It's too late. You should stay the night and go back in the morning." The driver declined. "It's just past 10, what's the big deal? I'm used to driving at night, so it's nice to go back now. Besides, I have a job to get to in Vung Tau early tomorrow." "Thank you, Thay Hai, but I'll pass." As he was backing out, he suddenly remembered. "What about her suitcase?" Hong panicked. "Oh, when she got out of the car, I forgot to remind her." Aunt Ba was surprised. "Which girl are you talking about?" As Hong received the suitcase from the driver, he awkwardly replied, "Just a girl who hitched a ride on the way." the driver casually said. She lives nearby, so don't worry, she'll surely come by to pick it up tomorrow. Aunt Ba was even more curious. Who lives near you? Hong had to tell the truth. The girl from the house next to ours. I met her on the road, and she hitched a ride. Aunt Ba's eyes widened. Are you saying, which girl? From which house? The large tiled house right next to our land. The Huyn Noi house? Yes, I'm not sure, but she said it was the house next to ours, and that's the only tiled house around. Her name is Nak Ha. Aunt Ba was visibly shaken. Oh my God, how can this be? Why? She called out to the house. Nak. Come out here, I need to talk to you. Nak, the eldest daughter of Hong's uncle and aunt, was older than Hong by nearly double. She came out, happy to see Hong. Aunt Hong has been back for a while, and I was too sick to come out. What's going on? Aunt Ba immediately asked. Do you remember Nak Ha, the daughter of Huyn Noi who lived next to us? Nak responded right away. Of course I remember, even though she died nearly 10 years ago, we were close friends in our youth. Hong laughed. My dear older sister, it's not that Nak Ha. This girl is only about 18. Nak argued back. If it's the daughter of Huyn Noi, then it can only be her, she's the same age as me. While Hong was still confused, Aunt Ba spoke in a trembling voice. You haven't been back in a long time, so you might not know. Huyn Noi only had one daughter named Nak Ha, the most beautiful girl in the area, and many people pursued her. But she never accepted anyone and suddenly passed away just after finishing her high school. When she died, the Huyn family line ended too, because just 2 years later, both of her parents died from grief. Then, Aunt Ba became too emotional to continue, and Nak had to add. She also had 2 brothers, but they are working in Saigon, and I heard they indulge in vices and never return home, so their large house has been mostly abandoned. No one has been seen around there for a long time, and people have almost forgotten about it. Hong still couldn't believe it. I'll check tomorrow to see if there are any other tiled houses around. There might be another Nak Ha. Nak laughed and shook her head. In this whole area, there are only our house and the Huyn Noi house with tiled roofs. You could search high and low, and you won't find a third house. Feeling puzzled, Hong held out the jacket and said, This is the jacket she left in your car. And here's her suitcase too. At this moment, Hong noticed a tag attached to the suitcase, which had her name and address written on it. Leaning down to read it, Hong exclaimed, Hey, read this. It clearly states, Le T Nak Ha T Hamlet, Ham Tai Commune, Huyn Noi Villa. Both Nak and Aunt Ba were taken aback. How can this be? Aunt Ba added, I attended Nak Ha's funeral. Her grave is still on our land, right next to ours. If needed, you can go see it tomorrow. Nak remarked. I suspect that girl saw you in a nice car and thought she could trick you. Hong stood there in shock for a moment and murmured, It can't be. He took the suitcase to his room but kept hearing Nak's remarks behind him. Those handsome, wealthy guys always get pursued by girls. Hong wanted to argue but decided against it. For him, the best course of action was to investigate directly. Nak called out as he entered his room. That room's window looks directly at the graves of the Huyn Noi family. You can easily see them when the moon is bright. Hong had no interest in that topic, but Nak's words made it hard for him to sleep. He also couldn't resist being curious about the girl's suitcase. After a few minutes of hesitation, he decided to press the lock and was surprised when it opened easily. The suitcase wasn't locked. What he found inside left him astonished. It was full of clothes meant for homeware. Everything was almost new and entirely pure white. The gentle fragrance emanating from the suitcase was overwhelming. Hong felt as if he was swooning from that strange scent. Finally, Hong's wish was fulfilled. He had successfully broken into the old house next door. This was his 3rd day here, and it had been quite difficult to sneak away from his aunt's warnings and his overly curious sister. They always reminded him, never be foolish enough to try to enter that abandoned house, understood? Although he pretended to listen, For the past 2 days, Hong had been looking for ways to get into the house. In truth, he had no doubt about the girl named Nakha. To him, the spooky and fanciful stories were just for fun. What he had seen and encountered was what he found credible. Especially the suitcase of clothes, which was living proof that the person wearing those clothes was undoubtedly a real girl, just like everyone else. His sharp intuition had led him to believe that. This morning, Hong had to find a way to tell his aunt that he was going to the neighboring village to visit some old friends, and he wouldn't be back until the afternoon. That way, he could leave the house without Nock's curiosity. Hong had to walk a distance of 5 or 6 kilometers, then sneak back using a shortcut to slip into the house through the back gate, far from the boundary of his Uncle Ba's property. Thinking that the house was uninhabited, Hong leisurely strolled from one side to the other and finally walked straight into the main house. It had to be said that the house was even larger and more imposing than his Uncle Ba's. Although it was old and had not been lived in for a long time, the entire house still remained intact, and inside, it didn't seem dilapidated at all. Everywhere he walked, Hong felt regret. He thought to himself that such a house without inhabitants was truly a waste. Especially when he approached a room and cracked the door open, he had to stop, for a gentle fragrance wafted from inside, making him exclaim. This fragrance! It reminded him exactly of the scent from the clothes in the girl's trunk. Nakha! Hong called out without thinking. For him, the person carrying that fragrance had to be Nakha. The door suddenly swung wide open, but no one was there to open it. Just then, a voice from inside spoke, just loud enough to be heard. Whoever is here can come in. I can't come out. The voice sounded tired and breathless. Hong was a bit startled, but it was just a fleeting moment, and he regained his usual courage and stepped into the room. At this point, Hong was astonished at the tastefully arranged and cozy room. He thought to himself that this was a room where someone lived. Close the door, as I'm sick and can't stand the noise outside. I'm also afraid of the light. At that moment, Hong mustered the courage to ask, Are you the owner of this house? Why is it abandoned outside but? He heard a soft sigh, but he still caught it. Then the voice spoke again. You're looking for a girl, right? Hong quickly replied. Yes, that's right. Who are you? I'm not important. My daughter is what matters. So Nakha is your daughter? A quiet exclamation. That's you. I instructed that only someone who knows her name can enter here. Why did you only come today? Where is Nakha now, ma'am? She's been waiting for you for 2 or 3 days. She sits in this room waiting until evening. Hong grew anxious. She knows my house. Why doesn't she come there to ask? I've been waiting. She came over 2 or 3 times, but they wouldn't let her meet you, causing her to return and sigh, because she left so many clothes in her suitcase, and for the past 2 days she had to wear washed clothes over and over again. Hong panicked. Then I'll go back to get it right away. Wait a minute. She went to visit her grandmother and will be back in the afternoon. To Truongin? Hong still wanted to run back to get the suitcase, but the woman in the room insisted he stay. Since you've come, please stay here. I need to talk to you. And without waiting for Hong to ask more, she continued. You want to know why my daughter and I are in this abandoned house, right? Yes. But when you came in, did you see that it really is abandoned? No. I was wondering about that. Another sigh, this time clearer, as if she moved closer to the curtain dividing the room from the outside. Her voice became harder to hear, but still enough for Hong to understand what she was saying. My daughter and I are the last 2 remaining of this once noble but now notorious lineage. It's just because... She paused for quite a while before continuing. It's just because I have a terminal illness. Hong exclaimed. So that's it. But don't worry. My illness is terminal but not contagious, so... Hong quickly corrected. No, that's not what I meant. I just wanted to know if this was why you kept your identity hidden from everyone. Almost like that. Because of this, I've been able to live in peace. The only trouble is that every time my daughter comes to visit, She has to avoid everyone and can't go outside. She paused again, taking a few more seconds before continuing in a reproachful tone. I don't understand how you and my daughter are close enough that she would tell you about this place. This is not a place for someone like you. Especially since you are the child of the person next door. What is your relationship with Knock over there? Do you know my cousin? Suddenly, the person behind the curtain exclaimed. You're the child of Prosecutor Vin? Hearing her mention his father's name, Hong was taken aback. My father passed away long ago. How do you know him? Oh my God! A shocked exclamation from within made Hong panic. He almost pulled back the curtain to rush in. Fortunately, she stopped him. You cannot come in. I ask again, are you really the child of Hai Vin? Yes, I am the only child of my father. He died when I was just 2 years old, so my uncle Ba raised me. I studied far away, so I rarely returned home, which is why I don't know many people here. I only got to know Nakha recently when she hitched a ride with me. What did you just say? Your father? Yes, my father passed away 7 or 8 years ago in France. What? Hai Vin went to France when? He went at the same time as I did. After 2 years in France, he died in a traffic accident. He was buried in France. Oh my God! This time the cry sounded more heart-wrenching, followed by sobs and gasps. Hong was confused. He waited for a moment before daring to ask. Are you okay? Do you need? Her voice sounded quite tired. You should go. If possible, when you have the chance, please bring Knock's suitcase here. You can leave it outside the door. There's no need to come in. I thank you. After that statement, Hong hardly heard any more sounds from inside. The door he had closed earlier suddenly opened slowly as if someone was opening it. Hong looked back in shock, but saw no one at the door. He spoke up before stepping back. I'm going home. I'll bring the suitcase right over. Still, there was no reply. As soon as Hong stepped out the door, it closed by itself. The house returned to its usual quiet demeanor. Hong left through the door he had entered, but he was a bit surprised to find that gate had been locked by someone. After fumbling around, he finally found another way out, and when he got outside, he was astonished to see a family graveyard blocking the exit, from where he could see his uncle and aunt's house just a bamboo fence away. Just as Nak had said the night before, this was the burial place of the Windley family. Among the 5 graves, there was one that, as soon as he saw it, Hong couldn't help but exclaim. Nak ha! If he hadn't heard Nak mention it beforehand, he would surely have been stunned standing there. He bent down to take a closer look and read the inscription of the date of death, April 14th, year of the ox. After calculating, Hong mumbled. So it's been more than 5 years. It can't be. While Hong was still dazed looking at the grave, he heard a loud call from the other side of the bamboo fence. Brother Hong, why are you over there? Hong looked up and saw Nak and his aunt staring wide-eyed at him. He stammered. I came over. Nak interrupted urgently. Come home right away. There's a guest from Saigon waiting for you. Hong was surprised. Who's the guest? I don't know anyone in Saigon. His aunt urged him. They've been waiting for over half an hour. Hurry back. They looked really scared when they saw you standing among the graves. Knox suggested. Why don't you sneak back quickly? Hong didn't want to cause a commotion at home, so he agreed to take the shortcut. When he got back to his house, Knox said, That way is where the dogs run back and forth, but no one dares to cross over there. His aunt scolded. Why did you go there alone? Hong had to explain. I was trying to find that girl to return her suitcase. Luckily, I found. Both Nak and his aunt were taken aback. Found who? Hong suddenly remembered he shouldn't mention what he just encountered, so he changed the subject. Who's waiting? Nak pointed at the house. A girl, she says she's a friend of yours. She's been waiting for a long time, and when I told her I didn't know when you'd be back, she said she could wait until whenever. Hong quickly stepped into the house, avoiding his aunt's question. As soon as he entered the living room, he he exclaimed. Hey, Nakha! The guest sitting there was the girl he had given a ride to, Nakha. Fortunately, at that moment, his aunt and Nak were not behind him, so Hong's surprise and the girl's words went unheard. Don't call me Nakha, just say I'm a friend from Saigon. You can call me Tui, Nak Tui. I wanted to meet you for a quick matter, so you don't need to worry. Before he could ask why, Nak stepped out and quickly said, You're lucky, because if my brother leaves, it'll be like a bird flying and a fish swimming. He won't know when to come back. Anyway, you two just talk, I'll go prepare food for the guest. The girl quickly waved her hand. No, thank you, I have to leave right away. I just stopped by to pick up the suitcase I left the other day. I can't stay for a meal. Nak looked surprised. Wait, last time my brother said this suitcase belonged to some Nakha? The girl clarified for Hong. Maybe Hong is mistaken, this suitcase is mine. Please let me take it, my ride is waiting for me outside. Hong caught the girl's discreet wink. He didn't say anything further and went into the room to get the suitcase. Once she had it, she quickly said goodbye and left. Hong had to chase after her, but she walked so fast that she disappeared behind the bushes in no time. He tried to follow her for a bit, but her white dress seemed to blend into the fence of the Huinlei house. Hong stood dazed for a while until he heard Nak's voice behind him. She's so beautiful. Why didn't you gallantly run after her to help carry her things? Hong smiled awkwardly. She walked too fast. I couldn't catch up. Despite trying to avoid it, he couldn't escape Nak's curiosity. Who is she? Why didn't you introduce her? A beauty like that, we probably only have the old Nakha left around here. Hong stared at Nak. Which Ha are you talking about? Well, Nakha, the daughter of Mr. Huinloi, my old friend. A beautiful woman with a tragic fate, otherwise. As they neared the house, Nak suddenly pulled Hong to a stop. Surely you don't know about the story between your father and Nakha? Hong felt jolted, shaking Nak's shoulder. What are you saying? Tell me again. This is something my mom forbade me to mention, but seeing you so interested in the Huinloi house, I'll tell you privately. Back in the day, when Uncle Hai, your dad, was still around, they had a relationship. Which two people? Uncle Hai and Nakha. Suddenly remembering the woman's anguished cries from the old house, Hong was stunned. Is that true? Nak continued recounting. Uncle Hai was almost 30 years older than her, and already had a wife and kids, which caused complications. In the end, Uncle Hai had to move to Saigon, and Nakha was heartbroken and went mad. As Nak was speaking, his aunt called out from inside. The rice is burnt. Where are you, you monkey? Nak dashed into the house, saying over her shoulder. I'll tell you more later. Hong was still bewildered. How could this happen? Why? He couldn't forget the desperate cries of the woman in the abandoned house. Suddenly, he exclaimed. Could she be? And to Nak's surprise, Hong sprinted straight towards the old house. He found it easier to enter this time than before, but due to his impatience, he felt like his steps were too slow. Finally, he managed to get inside. Unlike the last break-in, he couldn't find the room where he had met the mysterious woman. There were 4 or 5 rooms, all similar and locked tight. Even if he wanted to knock and call, he didn't dare. After hesitating for a while, he decided to randomly knock on a door that he vaguely remembered. But no one answered. Suddenly, he was startled, hearing a lingering scent reminiscent of the clothes in the suitcase. Should he knock on all the rooms? He made his way to the back of the house when he suddenly heard a sound from the room on his right. A cry! There was clearly soft crying coming from inside. It didn't seem to be just one person, it sounded like 2 people were crying. Hong dared not breathe too loudly. He pressed his ear against the door to listen more closely. Once he confirmed there were people inside crying, he tried to catch any words, but there was nothing but sobbing. After waiting for a while, a scream suddenly pierced through. Mom! Then silence. Hong, losing his patience, burst through the door. It swung open, revealing the same room he had been in earlier, but now a curtain had been drawn, revealing two graves lying side by side, and next to one of the open graves was a girl crouched, crying, her body trembling. "Knock ha!" The door slamming didn't startle her, but when Hong called her name, she turned around in shock and almost lost her balance, teetering toward the open grave. She was indeed the girl he had just spoken with. Next to her was the suitcase lying at her feet. "Knock ha!" Hong repeated as he stepped closer, fearing she might fall. But she raised her hand to stop him. "You shouldn't come here, my mom is." Suddenly she staggered, this time unable to hold herself up, and fell into the open grave. Hong quickly dashed forward, grabbing her flailing arm and pulling her back into his embrace. But before he could help her to steady herself, his eyes fell on the inside of the grave. There lay a perfectly intact corpse. He barely managed to gasp before freezing in place. For the first time, Hong understood what true fear felt like. He wasn't afraid of ghosts, just taken aback by the sight of a dead body, just as the girl regained her composure, putting her hand to close the coffin lid while explaining. "The person in there is my mother. She has been dead for a long time." Hong was astonished. "She's been dead for a long time, but how can the body still be intact and not?" "That's a secret that only my mother and I know." Suddenly Hong asked, "Are you Nakha?" The girl, surprised by his question, asked back, "How do you know?" Without answering, Hong countered, "Do you know someone named Vin Hai Vin?" This time, her eyes widened in disbelief. "How do you know him?" "Because that man is my biological father." Hong's words struck her like a bolt of lightning. She pointed to the grave beside her, trembling as she asked, "You mean this person?" At that moment, Hong finally looked down at the grave and was equally astonished. Why is it my father's grave?" The tombstone read, "Here lies Nguyen Hu Vin, Prosecutor Vin, serving his punishment." Hong couldn't believe his eyes. "My father was buried in France. How can there be a grave here? Why did my father serve punishment?" Suddenly, the girl turned to the recently closed grave and screamed, "Why is this happening, Mom? Why did you make me do this when you knew he was my brother?" Hong was confused. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" Then he suddenly remembered Nak's words. Hong exclaimed, "My father and is Nakha your mother?" Both looked at each other, and a long silence ensued. Flipping through the old pages in the chest filled with letters and books, Nakha began to tell. "My mother gave birth to me just under a month before she suddenly fell ill with a strange disease. No one knew what was wrong with her. She simply retreated to her room and forbade everyone from entering. At that time, my grandparents were still alive. They were one of the richest families in this area, so they could afford any doctors or medicine. Yet my mother insisted on not receiving treatment. She threatened everyone that if they didn't leave her alone, she would commit suicide. My grandparents were so scared that they complied with her wishes, bringing food to her every day. This went on for several years. I was still young and unaware, and I was sent away to be cared for elsewhere. It wasn't until I was 10 that I returned home for the first time and met my mother. In fact, I sneaked to see her because my grandparents wouldn't allow it, fearing I might catch her illness. That was when I first saw my mother, who had become nothing but skin and bones. Because during those years when she withdrew into her locked room, isolated from the outside world, everyone thought she had a terminal illness. In reality, she was preparing for her own death, so she barely ate, not because she was ill. That time when we met, she hugged me tightly and cried for a whole day, not letting me go outside. Then she gave me everything she had written during those years of isolation, telling me that I was the only one allowed to read it, and she made me promise to avenge her against a man. After saying that, she died in my arms." Hong interrupted at that point. "The man your mother wanted revenge on, was it my father?" The girl nodded. "Yes. She said she had devoted her whole life to that man, but he betrayed her. When he learned she was pregnant, he ran away and ignored her suffering. At that time, I was too young to understand all this. I only knew the pain of losing my mother, so I planned to tell my grandparents about what my mother instructed me. But before I could say anything, my mother's spirit appeared and cried out, preventing me from revealing her private matters. From that moment on, my mother's spirit returned every night, promising to stay by my side until I could avenge that man. As I grew older and gained understanding, I explained to my mother that he was my biological father. But she refused to listen, insisting that he was a heartless, irresponsible man who didn't deserve to be called a father. She instilled this hatred in me every day, so I also harbored resentment and built 2 graves in my mother's private room after my grandparents passed away, one for my mother and the other for him. She misunderstood your father. She thought he had betrayed her for another woman. But she didn't know that it was your grandfather who, after discovering the secret affair between your father and my mother, quietly arranged and bribed a French official to send your father far away, preventing him from contacting my mother again. That was why your father lost touch with my mother. Until the day your father, out of desperation, decided to leave the country. While in France, he once told me he had been betrayed by a woman who left him for a more powerful man. Back then, I didn't understand anything, so I blamed that woman. But when I returned here, especially after meeting your mother recently, I began to understand that it was probably all a scheme by your grandfather to separate our parents. Nakha nodded. I understand everything now, and my mother does too. The proof is in the words my mother just wrote on the grave wall. They show her regret. She said that in her life, she only made one mistake, the worst mistake, misunderstanding your father. Nakha looked at Hong with eyes seeking understanding. Both my mother and I misjudged your father, so I hope you won't be angry. I will also pray that your father's spirit forgives my mother and me. Hong interrupted. I believe my father no longer harbors any anger. I promise that this time when I return to France, I will find a way to bring his remains back here, and if you agree, I would like to bury him right next to your mother's grave. But then he suddenly remembered and asked, why is your mother's body here while there's another grave in the garden with her name on it? That was my mother's wish, and I made it. She didn't want anyone to know about her private world in this room. And what about the name? If your mother is Nakha, why do you also have that name? It was also my mother's wish. When I was born, my name was Tan Tui, but later my mother changed it to match her name. She said that the name Nakha only died once due to foolishness and naivety, while the Nakha still in this world must do the opposite, make men foolish and naive and take revenge on them. Honestly, my mother had informed me about your return, telling me to find a way to approach you and bring you here to meet her. I had no idea you were. Hong laughed, patting her shoulder. Who would have thought you almost ended up killing your half-brother? Looking down at the suitcase, Hong wondered. I'm curious about why your suitcase only has white clothes. Does that mean you never wear any other colors? Nakha was silent for a moment, then suddenly she burst into tears. Hong was startled. What's wrong, huh? Everything is clear now. We'll take care of each other. I promise to make up for what our father deprived you of. We'll honor our parents together. Suddenly, Nakha grabbed Hong's shoulders, crying uncontrollably. I almost harmed you. You know, listening to my mother, I planned that after killing you, I would come in here and die alongside her. These white clothes are what I prepared for my own burial. Hong comforted his sister. It's all in the past now. We need to be happy. I don't blame you at all. On the contrary, I care for you deeply, and I feel an even greater sense of responsibility. But I promise, I will give you the best of everything, my sister. They clasped each other's hands tightly. Throughout that afternoon, they remained in the room with the 2 graves, and that night, Hong decided to take Nakha to Uncle Ba's house for a proper introduction. The siblings talked nearly all night. Over a pot of chicken porridge that Nakha had cooked for them, Nakha cheerfully shared. My mother is a spirit, but since she has returned to me, I have never heard her say she would harm anyone. Perhaps she is the only gentle, vengeful spirit like that. Nak chimed in. Your mother used to be gentle and lovely too. I've known her well from playing with her for a long time. When Nakha heard Nak call her that, she quickly waved her hand. Why do you call me that? I am my mother's daughter, her friend. Nak laughed. One is your mother's daughter, but by blood, you are my elder sister. You are the daughter of Aunt Hai, and you are just younger than Hong, but to me, you are my sister." That night, the whole family stayed up until dawn with indescribable joy. From Ratchjia to Hatien is just over 60 kilometers, but the journey takes nearly a day, even in a private car. That's why, just at dawn, the driver Tu-se was busy preparing to start the traction. When the young mistress Noyetan climbed into the car, the clock showed exactly 6 o'clock. As soon as he started the engine, Tu-se reported to her, "Leaving this early, we hope to reach Qian Luang in time for the ceremony." Noyetan frowned. "Isn't there any way to leave earlier?" "Yes, the distance isn't far, but the road is bad, and with the rainy season, I can't drive fast. Besides, with you in the car, I can't dare to go over 30 kilometers an hour. 60 kilometers means it should take only 2 hours, so why will it take half a day? It's worse than going to Saigon, it's so frustrating." "Ma'am, it's because you haven't traveled this road, so you don't know. Compared to the road to Saigon, this one is much worse. We also have to cross over 10 makeshift iron bridges, so I can only crawl along. Honestly, taking a canoe would be faster." Noyetan pouted. "Then why not take a canoe?" Tu-se knew he had to humor his difficult mistress. "I wanted to do that, but yesterday when I suggested it, the boss scolded me immediately, saying that Miss Ba doesn't know how to swim, so how could she travel on water?" Although Noyetan was born and raised in the river region of Ratchjia, coming from a wealthy family, she only knew how to ride in cars and horses, so she had never had the opportunity to swim or row a boat. Moreover, she was known for her beauty and high status, so even if she wanted to try traveling by water, she wouldn't dare jump into the murky river, even though everyone knew the river water in the delta was famous for being clean. "Do you need to stop anywhere for breakfast or just keep going?" "Just drive on. Whenever we get hungry, we can stop at a restaurant along the way." Tu-se smiled. "This road doesn't have restaurants or shops like in Saigon. Either we eat at the market here, or we go straight to where we'll have lunch." Noyetan was annoyed. "What kind of place lacks everything? Why did my parents send me here to suffer?" Knowing she was just pretending, Tu-se had to concede, as this was also a task given to him by his boss. "Miss Ba, just bear with it a little. We were supposed to leave yesterday, but it got dark and rained, making the roads slippery, so we had to postpone until today. Just stay in the car. I'll stop at Tai Kai to have them prepare some steamed buns and pork meatballs for you to eat on the way, so we don't waste time." For some reason, she suddenly said, "Fine, let's stop at Tai Kai. I have some business to take care of there." Tu-se drove to the famous Tai Kai restaurant, stopping right at the door. Before he could get out and open the door as usual, Noyetan had already stepped out on her own. Instead of going into the restaurant, she crossed the street straight into a newly built, magnificent 3-story house. "Isn't that the house of the businessman Thuan Loy? Why is she going in there?" Tu-se was surprised, having driven for Mr. Thuan Tan for nearly 10 years. He knew all of his clients and friends well. He was even more familiar with businessman Thuan Loy, as Mr. Thuan Tan had often warned him. "You can do business or trade with anyone, but I absolutely forbid you from associating with the Thuan Loy crowd, understood?" Although Noyetan had been studying and living in Saigon for a long time, she must have known about that strict prohibition. So why was she visiting this house at a time when her entire family was waiting in Qian Luang to hold her wedding? While Tu-se was still puzzled and anxious, he suddenly overheard a customer sitting in Tai Kai saying loudly, "The young lady from the Thuan Tan family is visiting her boyfriend, the youngest son of Thuan Loy." Another voice, probably from someone at the same table, chimed in. "The most arrogant girl in the area, rich, smart, and beautiful, but she's into that Ut Thong from Thuan Loy, who is nothing but a wastrel, living a wild life and has a bad reputation." Someone else asked, "What does living a wild life mean?" "It means being a drug addict. Smoking opium, sniffing heroin." Tu-se turned back to look and saw a table of 4 or 5 people pointing and gossiping. Suddenly remembering the name Ut Thong, Tu-se exclaimed, That's right, he's the one who argued with Noyedan yesterday when I went to pick her up at the wharf. Since I didn't know what he looked like before, I kept wondering why someone in this area would dare to argue with the young mistress of the Thuan Tan family like that. Yesterday I heard someone call that guy Uthang. It took nearly half an hour for Noyedan to come back out, and her expression was not as cheerful as when she went in. As soon as she got in the car, she urged, "Drive faster." Knowing her temperament, Tu-Se didn't dare to ask anything. It wasn't until they passed SOC Zoe that she spoke up first. "I'm so hungry, just find something to eat." Tu-Se drove a bit further and spotted a roadside stall selling some coconut cakes and sticky rice. He hesitated and said, "They don't sell anything here besides these. I'm afraid you won't like them." But surprisingly, she rolled down the window and called out, "For coconut cakes, please." After buying, she urged again, "Hurry up." He handed her 2 cakes, kept 2 for himself, and she peeled one open, eating it happily and complimenting. "These are really delicious." Tu-Se silently chuckled at this irony. Normally, at home, she was picky and criticized simple dishes, yet today, when she was hungry, she enjoyed the most basic food. As he drove, he peeled one open to eat and said, "You eat little, but I have this every morning or sticky rice. After eating it a lot, I think it's better than steamed buns or noodle soup." Not realizing he was teasing her, Noyedan exclaimed, "The bean cakes here are wrapped better than in Saigon. We should buy some to take home for dinner." At that moment, Tu-Se reminded her, "But you have to attend the wedding tonight." Noyedan sighed. "Wedding? It's so tiring." Tu-Se pulled out a pink invitation card and reminded her, "The boss asked me to give you this stack of invitations to invite your close friends, but since you just got back yesterday afternoon, I didn't have time to hand them to you. Is there any way to inform them to come?" Noyedan grabbed the stack of invitations and was about to throw them out the window when Tu-Se quickly stopped her. "Even if you don't want to keep them, the wedding invitation has your name and the groom's name on it. It shouldn't be discarded." Noyedan threw the stack down on the floor of the car, grumbling, "If I can't please my parents, then forget about this wedding. It's so frustrating." Then suddenly she asked, "Do you know Wu Thong from the Thuan Loi family?" "Yes. I only know a bit. That young master is very rich. I heard he does something in Saigon, right?" "Exactly. I forbid you from mentioning anything about my connection to that family, especially to my father." "Don't worry. Tu-Se knows how to keep his mouth shut. Besides, I've never gossiped about anything. So even about your father." He managed to stop in time, but Noyedan wouldn't let it go. "What did you just say? What's up with my father?" I didn't mean anything." "Speak. If you don't tell me, don't blame me for being harsh. I can easily fire you tomorrow, and my father wouldn't mind." Tu-Se blamed himself for speaking out of turn, so he reluctantly revealed, "The boss went out when he was in Saigon. He told me not to mention it." "Is that all?" "Yes, that's all." "All right then. If anything comes up, tell me and I'll give you some money." After saying this, she took out a $5 bill and handed it to him. "Here, buy yourself a coffee." Tu-Se understood that this wasn't a reward for revealing information about the boss, but rather a bribe to keep quiet about her visit to Thang's house. "Drive a bit faster. I'm going to sleep. Just call me when we arrive." At this point, Tu-Se was driving while pondering the complicated affairs of the rich. Specifically, he was thinking about this girl, Noyedan. She was living it up in Saigon, indulging in fun more than studying, socializing with many people, including Yu Thong. Suddenly, her father called and told her to come home to get married, and she obediently returned. In this matter, Tu-Se only understood the surface. The deeper implications were still unclear to him. On the surface, the groom's family was powerful in Hatien, wealthier than the Thuan Tan Transportation Company by 5 to 7 times. This marriage seemed to be a means of mutual benefit between two wealthy families. The owner of Thuan Tan needed a strong alliance with the groom's family, hence sacrificing his beloved daughter. As for Noyedan, Tu-se sensed that she must have been caught in some predicament to accept marrying someone she didn't even know or love. This indifference toward her wedding this afternoon hinted that she had some plans in mind. Suddenly, she asked, "Do you know why my wedding isn't held in Ratchgia but at my maternal home?" Tu-se, even if he knew, wouldn't dare to say. He just mumbled, Maybe it's because of you." Noyetan suddenly patted him on the shoulder. "What if I asked you to take me as your wife? What would you think?" Even though he was a skilled driver with over 10 years of experience, her pat and that question made Tu-se lose control of the steering wheel, nearly crashing the car into a ditch. He stammered, You want me to live with you?" Noyetan suddenly burst into laughter. "If you're scared already, how can you make it real?" This time, Tu-se crashed the car into the roadside, diving straight into a thick bush. He managed to stop and turned to clasp his hands in prayer. "Please let me live to care for my elderly mother. If the boss fires me, I'll have to beg on the street." But Noyetan's tone became serious. "I'm serious. Do you dare to take me as your husband?" Without waiting for Tu-se to answer, she continued. "Just a pretend husband. For example, I could say that you got me pregnant, so I can cancel the wedding this afternoon. Then you just quit your job, and I'll give you a large sum of money enough to live on for the rest of your life. Would you accept?" Tu-se thought he heard wrong, stammering, "You mean?" Thinking he was on board, Noyetan elaborated. "To be honest, I'm pregnant with Uthang's child. Earlier, I went to ask him to help me stop this wedding, but he completely denied his responsibility. I'll make him pay, but right now, I need a way to escape this wedding. Only if you agree to sleep with me will everything be fine." Tu-se was sweating, his body trembling. "Please, I'm poor, but I wouldn't do something so immoral. Just let me live." Seeing he wouldn't comply, Noyetan screamed, "If you refuse, it's as if you've raped me." As she spoke, she hurriedly removed her outer clothing, revealing her upper body, contorting. "If you refuse, I'll scream and say you took advantage of me and raped me. Do you think I wouldn't dare?" As Noyetan raised her voice, Tu-se quickly covered her mouth in panic. "Hey, please!" He couldn't say another word, as he was now silenced by her luscious lips. Tu-se felt numb all over. Only Noyetan's soft voice remained. "Go back to Uthang's house, go upstairs and tell him I sent this, then leave immediately, no questions asked." She handed Tu-se a sealed letter. Driving a few kilometers from Qianluang, Tu-se pulled the car over to the side as instructed by Noyetan, and she said, "Find somewhere to hide for now, then take the bus to Saigon tomorrow to wait for me. Here, take this money to get by, and I'll give you double later." Tu-se held the money, his mind in turmoil. This meant he had just destroyed his own livelihood, cutting off his path to a decent life. Seeing him lingering by the roadside, Noyetan urged, "Find a place to hide, or people will see you and ruin everything. I'll take care of the rest." She took the wheel and drove off confidently. Tu-se felt dazed. Before he could stuff the large sum of money into his pocket, he heard someone calling from the roadside. "Come here and take a break, brother." Thinking someone had noticed him with money after just getting out of the car, Tu-se hurriedly walked over, carefully tucking the cash into his pocket. However, a teenager riding a bicycle chased after him, shouting, "Someone you know is calling you over there." Tu-se looked back and was startled, as the person stepping out of the roadside stall had a familiar face. After a few seconds of thought, Tu-se exclaimed, "Thong!" Although he didn't know him well, he had seen him once when he had argued with Noyetan, so as soon as he saw Tu-se, he recognized him. But why was he here? Didn't Noyetan just say she was going to see him at home? With no other choice, Tu-se had to turn back. Indeed, Thon was sitting alone at the roadside stall, and he quickly pulled Tu-se in and said, "I've been waiting for you here for a long time. But weren't you in Ratchgia?" Thong looked around before quickly saying, "I'd been in Qianluang since yesterday afternoon, and came here early. Yet Noyetan said she had just seen you at the Thuanloi store. I just drove her there to meet you." Thang shouted. That bitch set this up. How could I still be there? He was about to say something but quickly stopped and changed his tone. I came to ask you for a favor. I don't know if you'll be willing to help. Se was surprised. What can I do for you? Only you can help me right now. You need to go to the wedding this afternoon and find a way to stop them from getting married. Se stared at him in disbelief. Why don't you do it yourself? Because I just died. My spirit hasn't manifested yet, so I need to rely on you to act. Se, sitting in shock, exclaimed. What are you saying? I'm now a ghost. Since I just died, I can't act on my own wishes. I'm asking you for help because I know you're a good person, and I hope you'll help me seek justice. You know, Noyedan loves me, we were to marry, and she's 3 months pregnant. Now she and her father are chasing after money, so she's leaving me to marry that millionaire's son here in Qianluang. She can bear to kill me just like one would a chick. Se shouted. That can't be true. This morning, I saw her at your house for only about half an hour, and she said you betrayed her, denying the child she's carrying when she told you. Thang shoved a handful of money into Se's hand. Take this money, and do something that aligns with your conscience to help someone in need. You can consider this your fee, or a parting gift from me for leaving the Thuan Tan company. Seeing Se still looking at him with doubt, Thang pleaded. Please help me, even in death, my spirit will always remember your kindness. Still not convinced, are you? Look at my neck, doesn't it look swollen? That's the result of the opium that Noyedan poured into my mouth. Earlier, when she came upstairs to meet me, I was smoking opium. She pretended to sit down and prepare a cigarette for me, then suddenly poured the boiling opium from the lamp into my mouth, causing me to choke and die instantly. Only Noyedan knows how to kill like this because I once told her. She did this to easily marry someone else. Look! As he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished. Se was stunned. He could only hear his voice faintly in his ear. I'll borrow your body to go to the wedding, and after the job is done, you'll return to normal. No one will harm you, don't be afraid. Then he dissipated like mist, leaving no trace. This was his way of proving to Se that what he said was the truth. And that meant. Se stood there for a long time, then reached into both pockets, where the stacks of money still lay. He wondered, who do you hear? Although Se didn't know whose orders to follow, he ultimately decided to head back towards Qianluang. At first, he walked, but then he called for a rickshaw and pointed towards the town. He pretended to be a table server for the wedding banquet. Se managed to deceive everyone. Even the owner of Thuan Tan, who rode with Se daily, did not recognize his own driver, allowing Se to blend into the crowd at the party. The banquet was set to start at 6 o'clock, yet by 5 o'clock, almost all the guests had arrived. Mr. and Mrs. Thuan Tan had been restless all morning due to the absence of their daughter, the main character of the ceremony. Mrs. Thuan Tan kept nagging her husband. I told you, just wait for her to return before leaving, but you insisted on coming here early. Now, we don't even know where she is. What if she gets into trouble and doesn't come back? How can we hand over the bride to her in-laws then? Fortunately, by midday, Noyedan finally returned. Mrs. Thuan Tan was the only one in the house who knew about her daughter's unfortunate pregnancy, so she lightly scolded her. With your condition, why are you rushing around? Aren't you afraid it will disturb the baby? And have you dressed carefully? Don't let your belly stick out when you wear the wedding gown. It would be a disaster. Noyedan remained unfazed. Everything will be fine, no need to worry. Knowing her daughter's stubborn and reckless nature, Mrs. Tan snapped. If you mess this up, your father will kill you. It's not a joke. Death is the same, isn't it? Mrs. Tan lowered her voice to ask. Have you settled things with Thom? Is he keeping quiet so you can get through this? Still in a carefree tone, she replied. It's all done. Not only is he quiet about this, but he's also quiet forever. Mrs. Tan widened her eyes at her daughter. What do you mean? Forever? It means he will never bother anyone again." After saying this, she stood up and walked straight into her private room. Although this was her grandmother's house, being the favored granddaughter, Noyetan enjoyed all privileges. Her grandmother even declared that if she wanted, the entire family fortune would belong to her. So, it was natural for her wedding to be held here instead of in Rachgia, and no one questioned it. Mrs. Tan was still uneasy, so she followed her daughter into the private room. Seeing Noyetan looking tired, she called out, "Someone, tell the kitchen to bring food for Miss Ba right away. Serve it in this room." She didn't want to eat, but her stomach growled because she had only had 2 coconut cakes since morning. So, she decided to eat to fill her stomach before dealing with the afternoon's events. Sensing her daughter's intentions, Mrs. Tan quietly asked, "What are you planning, Noyetan? Tell me, don't do anything foolish." She remained silent, sprawled out on the bed. Mrs. Tan had to coax her for a while before she finally revealed, "This afternoon, I'll wait for the groom's family to hand over the debt paper to my parents, then I'll announce to everyone that I'm pregnant with someone else's child, and to cancel the wedding immediately." Mrs. Tan gasped in shock. "No! Don't do that, my dear! Do you know if you do that, your father will have a heart attack? Your grandmother won't survive it either. You've already sacrificed so much, just stick with it. This guy isn't worthless. He's still better than Ut Thang in both character and wealth. Moreover, as far as I know, he's gentle and naive. He won't realize you were pregnant months ago. Once you're married, I'll find a way to keep the pregnancy under wraps, don't worry." Noyetan, already tired of the nagging, yelled, "Enough, Mom! I know what I have to do. Once this is over, not only will I be free from this, but I'll also be done with Ut Thang. Someone else will take the blame for his death. In just 2 days, I'll return to Saigon and continue my free life, and from now on, you and Dad don't have to worry about me anymore." Mrs. Tan asked again, "Who will take the blame for Thang?" "What do you mean, Thang is dead?" Noyetan calmly replied. "He left me with the consequences, so he must pay. It's just unfortunate for Tusei. He's been deceived by me because of his naivety. He'll visit Thang's house to deliver a letter where I'll write that I fell in love with the driver, so he should stop looking for me. In reality, those are just lies, meant to make people think that Tusei sought him out and killed Thang out of jealousy when they discover his death." Mrs. Tan, who also had her share of tricks, couldn't help but shudder at her daughter's words. "You're so cruel, Aunt. Tusei is poor, and he has an elderly mother. How can you bear to harm him like that?" Noyetan remained calm. Life and death are all fated. His fate has led him into this mess. Anyway, he'll get a large sum of money before going to prison. What's there to worry about? All her words were heard by one other person besides her mother, and that person was none other than Tusei. In his disguise as a server, Tusei volunteered to bring food into the young mistress's room, and when he reached the door, he inadvertently overheard the entire conversation inside. As soon as Noyetan finished speaking, the tray in Tusei's hand fell to the floor. He suddenly collapsed, seemingly feeling a shadow leave his body. When Mrs. Tan and Noyetan opened the door, they only heard him scream, pointing towards the window. "Ut Thang!" Noyetan panicked. Why are you still here?" Still pointing and stammering. Ut Thang." Then he collapsed, foaming at the mouth. Noyetan was stunned, murmuring in fear. He's dead." She could only say that much before she staggered, clutching her stomach in pain. Mrs. Thuan Tan screamed, and the household staff rushed in, carrying Noyetan back to her room while Tusei was taken to the servants' quarters. From then until the wedding ceremony, he would occasionally whisper, Ut, I can't do it." Meanwhile, the time for the ceremony had come, and the groom's family arrived on time. According to tradition, the bride had to dress in ceremonial attire to greet and pay respects to the ancestors. However, due to the unexpected situation, after discussing with the groom's family, they agreed to wait until the bride was taken care of before holding the ceremony. Even if Noyetan didn't regain consciousness, either side would force her to be present for the ancestral rites. The groom's father even said, "Since my son is the groom, instead of bringing his wife home to pay respects to the ancestors and then returning here to stay, we'll do the ancestral rites later when she's awake. It's no problem." Thus, the wedding proceeded smoothly. The fact that Noyetan gave birth only 5 months after getting married surprised the household staff greatly. They whispered among themselves, "Is she giving birth prematurely, or what? Why bother discussing the affairs of the rich? It's exhausting. Do rich people really give birth just a few months after getting pregnant? Are they different from us poor folks?" One person laughed. "Not really, but they can give birth whenever they want. Who's going to stop them?" The gossip abruptly ended when the master, Namhoa, stepped out and asked, "Why aren't you working and just chatting?" The 3 servants hurriedly dispersed in different directions. They didn't find him difficult, but since they often talked behind his back, they quickly fled. However, just a short while later, they found a way to gather again to continue their conversation. Poor Hoa, being a husband and father with no authority at all, he spends his whole day just running errands for that shrew. The speaker was Tam's son, the oldest servant in the household of Grandma Hai. She continued, "This man is wealthy, yet he agreed to live as a son-in-law just because he loves Noyetan so much. But that shrew An always dominates and bullies her husband. It's infuriating to see." The second one, Ba Tam, quickly chimed in. "Rich girls often bully their husbands. If only my husband were here, he'd beat her every day until she couldn't breathe." The last one, Tu Swan, the most gentle among the servants, quickly interrupted. "Let them be. If they catch wind of this, and it reaches the young mistress's ears, we might find ourselves in trouble." Tam's son wouldn't let it go. "I'd rather catch crabs than spend all day watching that haughty, rude girl. It's just too annoying." Then she leaned in close to her friends and whispered, "I heard rumors that Noyetan was previously, seeing, the son of the owner of the Thuan Loy Transport Company. I'd bet the child in her belly is his." Tu Swang waved her hand. "Don't spread such rumors. If Nam Hoa hears that, it'll be terrible for him." Ba Tam appeared more knowledgeable. "Do you remember the driver Tu Say? Poor guy. I don't know why he suddenly went crazy and can't drive anymore. People say he's also involved with Miss Noyetan, not just Uthan." Tam's son had even more details to share, she recounted eagerly. "Tu Say once told me something shocking when he was lucid for a moment, and I was the only one who heard it. Do you want to know? The other two weren't going to miss a story like that." "What did Tu say?" "One afternoon, I was napping in the back when Tu Say approached me. Seeing his disheveled hair, I was scared and wanted to run, but he begged me to let him explain the turmoil in his heart. His voice didn't sound like nonsense, so I sat down to listen. Tu Say honestly said that Noyetan had undressed for him, and even tempted him into marrying her." I was shocked. The two gasped. "Is that true? So, could Tu Say be the father of that child?" Tam's son was about to respond when suddenly she screamed and collapsed, coughing up blood as if she had been stabbed. Tu Swang panicked and shouted, "Stop! Don't talk anymore, let's help her." Thanks to that incident, the gossip ended. At that moment, a loud voice called from inside. "Miss Ba is in labor. Shut the doors and don't let anyone in." In fact, Noyetan had gone into labor early in the morning and had summoned 3 midwives, but none could help her give birth, so they just stood around outside waiting. Now, upon hearing the maid's announcement, all 3 midwives rushed in at once. But they had to halt right at the door because they were met with a scene that was hard to believe. Noyetan had already given birth, seemingly exhausted, lying there, while next to her was a newborn, its body red as blood, nestling against its mother as if searching for milk. It took a few seconds before the midwives cried out, "Support her!" They rushed in and screamed in unison as the newborn turned its face towards them. Oh my God! What they saw was more like a monster than a baby. The child's face resembled that of a dog rather than a human. Upon seeing the midwives, the baby suddenly threw its head back and let out a long wail like a dog's howl. Oh my God! The first midwife stepped in last, and as she stepped back, she stumbled. The second midwife turned and fell on top of the first. Finally, all three lay piled on each other. Meanwhile, the baby's wailing seemed endless. Until Nam Hoa walked back in. Instead of being frightened like the others, he remained remarkably calm and scolded everyone. How could you leave my child like this? He walked over, embraced the baby, lifted it gently, and placed it softly on Noyedan's lap. The baby stopped howling and instead became very docile. Hoa sat down beside his wife and child, affectionately asking, "How are you? Are you very tired?" Noyedan stirred slightly, but her eyes remained tightly shut, whispering something that made Nam Hoa immediately jump up. He called out loudly, "Get these midwives out of here!" The servants, though terrified, didn't dare argue and had to carry them out while trembling. Meanwhile, inside the delivery room with his wife, Nam Hoa took on the duties of a midwife himself. He bathed the baby and wrapped it tenderly, filled with love. And it wasn't just that day. In the following days, Nam Hoa continued to do the same. It seemed he had accepted this role. Strangely, Noyedan, who had always been spoiled, endured silently even after giving birth to such a monstrous child, staying hidden with her husband to care for their baby. They strictly prohibited anyone from entering their private room. Every day, the servants could only bring food and milk to the door, placing it on a small table before leaving. The couple and their child lived almost entirely within those four walls. As for the three midwives, after fainting and being treated, all three eventually went mad. Especially whenever anyone mentioned the monster baby, they would scream and flee. Even those who were curious and gossiped about that monstrosity suffered ailments like stomachaches, headaches, and even coughed up blood for no reason. As a result, no one dared gossip anymore. 3 years later. Fortunately, as the boy grew, his face became more pleasant than when he was born. Thus, his parents decided to take him outside. Nam Hoa named him Thuan Tom to resemble his own name, Thuan Hoa. But every time he called that name, the boy would cry, seemingly refusing. Finally, when he learned to speak, he identified himself as Thong. Upon hearing this name, Noyedan was taken aback and quickly interrupted him. "No, you can't." But the child clearly stated, "I like that name better. I belong to this person." Luckily, when the boy said that, Nam Hoa wasn't around. So Noyedan instructed her son, "It's okay to be called Thong, but don't tell your father who you really belong to, understand?" The boy just smiled without responding. Nam Hoa remained carefree and devoted to his child. And curiously, when the baby was born, everyone in the house feared him, but as he grew up, people loved him more. It seemed the boy understood his situation, so he acted gentle and friendly with everyone in the house, especially with the servants. Thanks to that, when he turned 6, it was time for school. While Nam Hoa was planning to bring a tutor home to teach, Chin Lai, the maid and wet nurse, volunteered to take the boy to school every day. "You two just let me take care of him. It's better for him to go to school than to stay at home." Hearing this, Nam Hoa and his wife agreed. Surprisingly, beyond their worries, Thong quickly won the affection of his classmates and teachers. Although he was no longer as unattractive as when he was born, his face still had a puppy-like cuteness. Strangely, none of the other students ever mocked him. Especially, Thong was very studious, far surpassing his classmates. Perhaps that was also why they liked him, out of respect as well. Everything was going smoothly, so Noyedan and her husband no longer had to worry about the burden they thought they would carry for life. Noyedan, especially, was free again to return to her old lifestyle, frequently going to Ratchjia and Saigon, claiming she was busy with business dealings, but in reality, she was reconnecting with the fun of her youth that had been interrupted for 6 or 7 years. It was unfortunate for Nam Hoa, who, since marrying, had become a true henpecked husband, living under the guidance of his wife and accepting it unconditionally. He comforted himself by throwing himself into business. Since moving in with the Thuan Ton family, Nam Hoa had been instructed by his parents to manage the large assets that his in-laws entrusted to him. First, the debt that the Thuan Tan family owed, which was to be deducted when they got married, and turned into capital for the couple through the vehicles they used for transporting guests under the name of his wife's family company, which his in-laws promised to hand over to them to manage after 3 years of marriage. Second, there was a substantial sum of money given directly to Hoa and Noyetan to set up a seafood export company, with Nam Hoa as the owner. With so much work, Hoa was barely able to keep up, let alone travel with his wife. So, Noyetan took the opportunity to find reasons to be away from home. Another tragedy stemmed from this. One morning, after spending a week in Saigon, Noyetan came home at midnight, accompanied by a strange man. They seemed to have been drinking somewhere, as the smell of alcohol clung to them. "Where have you been that you came back so late? The roads are long and difficult. Why didn't you come back a bit earlier?" Nam Hoa said only this, yet Noyetan exploded. "Do you want to keep me at home like a guard dog? Where I go and when I return is my business, not yours." After saying this to her husband, she turned to the man accompanying her and softened her tone. "Mr. Lai, feel free. This is how it is in this house. You can't change that." The man, referred to as Mr. Lai, seemed a bit hesitant around Nam Hoa, but seeing Noyetan's carefree attitude, he grew bolder and stepped into the living room. Noyetan shouted into the back of the house. "We have a guest. Why isn't anyone taking care of drinks? Where are you all?" Nam Hoa replied gently. "They've all gone to work. Today we have to mobilize everyone in the house to handle the shipment for the boat. Can't you just get a few glasses of water?" Nam Hoa looked at the guest with an awkward smile. "Please sit down. I'll take care of the drinks. We're from the countryside and busy, so please bear with us." Lai felt awkward too. "Don't worry about it, sir." At this point, Noyetan turned to introduce. "This is Nam Hoa, the father of the little one. And this is Lawyer Lai, who is handling my affairs." Lai shook Hoa's hand politely. "Mr. Hoa, it's a pleasure to meet you. I am here to assist Ms. An." Noyetan cut him off. "I have some business to attend to and needed Mr. Lai to help. But we don't have any business for a lawyer at home?" Nam Hoa asked honestly, not expecting Noyetan to explode again. "I asked for his help. Don't talk nonsense. Just go get drinks for our guest." Nam Hoa was used to tolerating his wife for a long time, but her outrageous behavior in front of a stranger, plus her comments about needing the lawyer, made him a bit upset. He went to get drinks for the guests, but when he came back, he could no longer remain silent. "What did you need the lawyer for?" Noyetan didn't answer but stood up and went straight to the bedroom, returning a moment later with a stack of papers to hand to Lai. "Is this enough?" As soon as Nam Hoa saw the stack of papers, he exclaimed, "House and land documents, why are you giving these to the lawyer?" At this point, Noyetan shouted, "Are you meddling in my business again?" "Yes, it's my house, and I can sell it if I want. What's it to you?" Faced with his wife's outrageous attitude, even a saint couldn't tolerate it, so Nam Hoa turned to Lawyer Lai and stated clearly, "Anything else is fine, but not these documents. Give them back to me." As he reached for them, Noyetan grabbed them and retorted, "What right do you have to stop me? Don't you know this is my property, given to me by my parents so you could marry me? If it's mine, I have the right to do whatever I want. But that doesn't mean you can pawn it. Isn't that right, lawyer?" Lawyer Lai was unprepared for this situation, so he stammered, This is just what my client. Noyetan was still aggressive. "You don't need to talk to him. This house is in my name, I have the right." Then she pulled Lawyer Lai's hand and walked straight into the guest room on the left side of the house, casually saying, "I'll work in here with the lawyer. You can sleep alone with Thong." Nam Hoa could only watch his wife's figure disappear into the room with the lawyer. Frustrated, Nam Hoa quietly returned to his room. He encountered Thong standing at the door. Fearing the boy would understand adult matters, Hoa told him, "Let's go to bed, son." But Thong protested. "Dad, let me see what they're doing." "Dad, why are you letting this happen? Surprised that his son was paying attention to this, Nam Hoa quickly brushed him off. Don't pay attention to adult matters. Your mom has a guest who needs to work, so... Thong, behaving more maturely than expected, looked at his father and shook his head slightly, saying, You'll face the consequences, Dad. After saying that, he walked outside. Nam Hoa called after him. It's late. Where are you going instead of going to sleep? But the boy had already left. At 11, he seemed to understand what was happening in the house. It was painful for Nam Hoa that nearly all night, Noyedan stayed with the lawyer in the room, never coming out. And if he had been a little more observant, he would have noticed what they were doing when the lights in the room dimmed. The shocking news spread throughout the neighborhood. A man died in Noyedan's room. When the authorities arrived, they found a man lying dead on the bed, completely naked, with his clothes and those of the homeowner, Noyedan, nearby. Nam Hoa was in shock, running around looking for his wife, but she was nowhere to be found until Thang pointed out to his father. Mom is hiding in the bamboo thicket behind the house. When Nam Hoa went there, he found Noyedan in a similar state, sitting shivering in the bushes, crying out for help. Please let me out. Nam Hoa had to call the maid to bring a blanket to cover his wife and take her back into the house. But as soon as they entered, she screamed, Let me out! Don't let him stay in the house. Thinking she meant the lawyer, Nam Hoa said, They've taken his body to the hospital for an autopsy. There's no one else here. But Noyedan was still terrified. He's still here. He will kill me. Looking around and seeing only Thang standing there, Nam Hoa said, Son, help me take your mom inside. But the boy quietly turned away, mumbling, I'm leaving. Once Thang was gone, Noyedan was no longer scared. She let her husband dress her and stayed locked in their bedroom. By noon that day, the authorities came to invite both of them to the police station to investigate the incident in their home. Initially, they concluded the victim, named Lai, was a lawyer and died from asphyxiation due to a narcotic substance, suspected to be pure opium. After taking full statements from both Nam Hoa and his wife, they released Nam Hoa, while Noyedan was detained. One of the investigators, after hearing the conclusion, spoke up. I remember over 10 years ago, when I was still at the Ratchjia police station, I witnessed a similar death case. The victim then was Ut Than, son of the owner of Thuan Loy. He also died while smoking opium and choked to death, just like this. The only difference was Ut Than was smoking when he choked, while this man was not smoking but had opium in his mouth and lungs. Strange indeed. After temporarily detaining Noyedan, the investigator privately told his colleagues, As far as I know, Ut Than used to be the lover of this Noyedan. I wonder if the two deaths are related since both were involved with the same woman? Nevertheless, Noyedan was only held for one night. The next day, she was released, likely because Nam Hoa paid a bribe. Since returning home, she pointed at everyone she saw, shouting, There he is! That afternoon, a car from Saigon pulled up outside, and 3 men got out and walked straight into the house. Nam Hoa went out to greet them. After asking for their identities, one of the men said solemnly, I am Bailiff Le Ven Tai. We bring an order from the Saigon District Court, in coordination with the Ratchjia Court Clerk, allowing me to read the order to seize the assets of Mrs. Lam Noyedan, the owner of this property and 4 other locations listed here. The reason, Ms. Noyedan has mortgaged this property to Mr. Tran Angwan, who has been with us for over a year and has defaulted on payment without the ability to repay. Therefore, in the recent hearing on, the court has ruled to seize this property for the public treasury, and then the procedure will be to repay Mr. Tran Angwan. We request that you summon Mrs. Noyedan to sign the documentation so we can proceed with our duty. Nam Hoa was in panic. Let me see this case. I'm her husband. I know nothing about it. The bailiff responded sternly. This is the court order. We hope you comply. But my wife is seriously ill and cannot come out. Is there any way I can request a delay in the execution of this order? The bailiff shook his head. We are merely executing the order. You should comply, and if you have any complaints, file them with the court later. Just as Nam Hoa was still confused about what to do, he suddenly heard his son's voice. Thang appeared unexpectedly and said loudly, "My mom is bedridden, and my dad knows nothing about this. How can you do this?" Seeing the teenager speaking out like that, the bailiff snapped. Kids shouldn't meddle in legal matters. But Thang wasn't intimidated and raised his chin. "You say you have a court order, but where is it? What proves that you are executing the law?" The bailiff was trembling with anger, but he held up the document, declaring, "This is the court order." Thang looked up and laughed. "You act like no one here can see. Is that what you call a court order?" The bailiff froze, looking at the document he had brought from Saigon, and exclaimed, "What's going on here?" In his hand, he was holding a blank piece of paper, with no writing at all. "How strange!" Thang laughed heartily. "What's so strange about it? You're abusing your power to intimidate good people. Show us the court order, or you should leave this house, otherwise." The bailiff rummaged through his bag repeatedly but found nothing. He turned to the court clerk from Ratchgia. "This morning when I showed it to you, didn't you give it back to me?" The clerk replied immediately. "Why would I not return it? If I hadn't returned it, how could you have read it to the homeowner just now?" The bailiff suddenly realized, his eyes wide. "That's right, what I just read was the order, but how now?" He checked both sides of the blank paper and slapped his forehead, exclaiming, "Heaven help me! How could this happen?" He scratched his head for a while and then turned to Nam Hoa to apologize. "We're sorry, sir. This was an unfortunate oversight. However, we will return to Saigon and come back with all the proper procedures." After they left, Thang burst into laughter, and Nam Hoa, astonished, asked, "How did you know this was going to happen? How did you know he didn't have a court order in hand?" Thang pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "It's right here. How could he have it in hand?" Nam Hoa took the paper and was shocked. "Where did you get this?" Thang hesitated. "I found it. But it doesn't matter. As long as they don't seize our house today, that's what matters. Don't you think so?" Nam Hoa sighed. "Your mother caused this trouble. If they don't seize it now, they will eventually. Sooner or later, we'll lose everything and be out on the street. I don't understand what your mother has done to get to this point." Thang looked at his mother's room, then at his father, and shook his head slightly, saying nothing. Nam Hoa quietly asked his son, "Did you save your mother?" Thang stared wide-eyed at his father. "Why would I save someone who betrayed us? I. He was about to say something but stopped in time. Nam Hoa wanted to ask more, but Thang had already stepped outside and disappeared. Left alone, unsure of what to do, Nam Hoa took the court order and walked into his wife's room to show Noyedan and ask a few questions. But he was astonished to find the bed empty. "She just lay here a moment ago?" He ran outside to look but couldn't find her. Later, when he asked the servants, they reported, "We saw her leave in a car heading towards Ratchgia when the guests arrived." Thinking his wife was avoiding facing the law, Nam Hoa didn't go searching for her. He sat down to review all the documents about their house and business. At this moment, he was horrified, as most of the remaining documents were just photocopies. All the originals were missing. It turned out that for a long time, Noyedan had gradually taken the property ownership papers to mortgage without his knowledge. Why would she mortgage them when they were one of the most prosperous couples in the area, lacking nothing? In a small paper mixed in with the documents, Nam Hoa read some numbers, and after a moment of contemplation, he suddenly realized these were the total debts Noyedan owed to over 10 people, and as he counted the debts in his mind, he exclaimed, "Oh my God! The total debt amounts to over 1,000 taels of gold." Nam Hoa jumped up, stunned, his hands and feet trembling. It felt like everything was over. The hard work he had put in for the past 10 years, along with the capital from both sides of their families, had turned to ashes in an instant. "The heavens have betrayed me." "It's not the heavens, it's people who harm you." Nam Hoa was startled by someone's remark. He looked up and realized it was his son, Thang. He stood in front of his father, holding a stack of papers, and handed them to Nam Hoa, saying, "This is my way of repaying you for everything you've done for me since I was born." Nam Hoa looked at the stack of documents and was taken aback. "Dead papers? Where did you get these?" "This one is a debt of 200 taels of gold, mortgaging the rice mill in the canal. And this one is a debt of 150 taels, mortgaging a fleet of 10 fishing boats. This is..." Unable to read further, Nam Hoa trembled and asked, "How did you get these?" Thang spoke like an adult. "Mom pawned these for people, and now they are overdue. The bailiff just came to seize the property to sell and pay the debts." Nam Hoa worriedly asked, "Where did you get these? Did you steal them?" "You can't do that, son. If you borrowed, you have to pay it back. Whatever I have left, I'll pay a little at a time. I'll plead with them for an extension." Thang exclaimed, "I have paid all the debts." "What? You're joking at a time like this?" Thinking his son was joking, Nam Hoa looked at his son's serious face. "I'm serious. I paid them back. That's why they gave me the debt papers." "But..." Thang suddenly turned to the outside and shouted, "Uncle Tu, bring her in." A man entered carrying someone. As soon as Nam Hoa saw, he shouted, "Tu say, who are you carrying?" At that moment, he looked closely and screamed, "Noyadan!" In Tu Se's arms was Noyadan, looking limp like a corpse. Knowing that Nam Hoa would ask, Tu Se spoke up. "I found her trying to drive into the river to commit suicide, so I managed to save her and bring her back here. And I could do this thanks to this young man, Thang." Hearing Thang's name, Nam Hoa turned around, surprised. There was no one else but Thang standing there. "What did Uncle Tu just say?" "Thang informed me in time, that's why I could come to save her." "You should thank him." Just then, Nam Hoa exclaimed, "Hey Thang, where are you going?" Thang said nothing and quietly walked outside, disappearing. Tu Se said, "That's Thang. Why don't you thank him? It's thanks to him that all your debt papers were retrieved. He paid all the debts." Nam Hoa felt like he was dreaming. "Uncle Thang has been dead for a long time?" Tu Se replied calmly. "Then it must be a ghost who did this." After a long silence, Tu Se began to recount. "On your wedding day, the ghost of Thang blocked my way and gave me some money to crash your wedding. I listened, but when I arrived, I overheard Noyadan confessing to her mother. I was stunned, and so was Thang's spirit when he heard that, so we let your wedding proceed without interruption. Later, Thang would sometimes appear to inform me that he had changed his mind about ruining you and Noyadan, allowing you to continue your life together, leading to even worse consequences. Do you know that the monster Noyadan gave birth to is because Thang was reincarnated? He was determined to destroy everything, using that grotesque child to make you suffer, and eventually, when that child grew up, it would ruin your family and wipe out your fortune." Hearing this, Nam Hoa panicked and shouted, "Oh God, is my child okay? If it's Thang's spirit, then is he still my son?" Tu Se sighed. "That poor child. He planned all that, but after being reborn as your child, he witnessed how you were bullied by your wife, saw your kind heart, and your diligent hard work, so he turned from enemy to friend. Thang no longer wanted to ruin you, on the contrary, he has helped you a lot. Like with Noyadan pawning the property." Nam Hoa was confused. "That incident? The one who destroyed the court order was Thang. The one who brought you those debt papers was also Thang. In the form of your son, Thang knew everything happening in this house." Nam Hoa remembered his son and yelled, "Thang, where are you?" Tu Se sighed. "In life, when you gain something, you often lose something else. Thang was just the wronged spirit of Uncle Thang, seeking revenge on Noyadan and you. Now that things have changed, his spirit has vanished, so your son cannot exist either." Nam Hoa continued to cry out, "My son, oh God!" Tu Se gently replied, "According to what Thang told me, after this incident, Noyadan changed completely. She is no longer the same person. You probably shouldn't hold grudges, give her a chance to start over. And according to Thang, You will soon have a son to replace your late son Thong. Nam Hoa stood in shock for a long time. When a soft call came from inside the room, Tu Se said, "Noi Yedan is waking up, you should go in with her." "I'll excuse myself." Tu Se quickly stepped outside. Nam Hoa rushed into the room. Noi Yedan had just woken up. Her face was pale, her voice faint, but she still tried to speak. "I'm sorry, my love." Nam Hoa shed tears. "I'm just glad you're awake, don't think too much about it." "Our child," Nam Hoa said through his tears. "He's gone." Noi Yedan grasped her husband's hand tightly, her voice choked. "I know. I atoned for my sins to you. Please kick me out of this house. I don't deserve to be considered your wife." She tried to sit up and get out of bed to leave. But Nam Hoa held her back, speaking with compassion. "Let's forget everything that has passed. Consider it an accident. In fact, it was an accident. You and I were both haunted by a spirit. Now we can truly live for ourselves." He bent down to kiss his wife's wrinkled cheeks, whispering in her ear, "Soon we will have another son."